pressing go.
Good evening, everybody. It's gone 6 o'clock, so we'll make a start. I'd like to welcome councillors, visitors, speakers. There's no fire drill we've been told about for tonight, so if the bell does go off, please head for the door and make your way onto the car park for assembly. Would you warn you, this meeting is being transmitted live on YouTube and will be recorded, so that if you are speaking here, you must bear that in mind. The last meeting had to be cancelled because it was the night before the election, and so this is quite a big agenda. I should bear that in mind. So it's going to take a little time. Can I ask first for apologies?
Yes, Chair. Apologies tonight from Councillor O'Brien, and attending as substitute is Councillor Slack.
Thank you. Item 2, approval of minutes of previous meeting. Can somebody so move that?
Chair.
Second. Thank you. All in favour? Public participation. We have a speaker on 2 items, Mr. Richard Walker of Matlock Civic Association. Mr. Walker, if you're there, would you mind taking your place on the desk in front there? And when you get there, if you press the button on the speaker, you have 3 minutes, and we'll give you a warning when you've got 30 seconds left.
Thank you.
Okay? Over to you then. Thank you.
So there are 2 items that I'm speaking on. The first one is item 7 relating to developer contributions. The November 2019 Committee of Matlock Civic Association was unanimously concerned about the draft insofar as it related to viability. Developers should buy property in the full knowledge of all established planning requirements in approved local plan policy and supplementary planning documents. Consequently, we request the addition of the following paragraph, or words to the same effect, as follows. Permissions for substandard development, including reduced content of affordable housing, are unlikely to be granted on the basis of developer profitability and viability. If prospective applicants have not properly taken account of planning policy requirements before purchasing land for development and bought the land at too high a price, the community should not pay in the form of poorer infrastructure, inadequate provision for social housing, and development which is poor quality and or not enhancing the character and appearance of the area. The inclusion of this paragraph should reduce the Council's time in processing applications for concessions and enable greater consistency for developers, the Council and all interested parties. We accept the officer response in Appendix 1, number 40, that the affordable housing policy requirement triggers a financial appraisal under the SDP. Our request is to set the basis for processing applications to relax obligations and conditions. To conclude on this point, the proposed SDP is generally commendable, and we want to ensure that the primary planning objective of securing good development in accordance with council policy is not undermined. One final point, and an additional point actually. Schemes for associated instruction from scratch, e.g. a new school or doctor's surgery, can be very time consuming, and payback clauses should account for this. I know the council have done that, but MCA think that 10 years should normally be the minimum period during which the council should be allowed to hold developer contributions. And I wondered if I could just add...
30 seconds.
How many?
30 seconds.
Oh, well, I can do that quite comfortably. Thank you. Perhaps I could add that we hope that a member of the committee might move that the development contributions SDP be amended to include my suggested paragraph 3 of my presentation, which is the emboldened paragraph. All words to the same effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Walker. And now your submission for item 8, please. Once again, 3 more minutes. We'll tell you when there's 30 seconds left.
So this relates to the Housing Delivery Action Plan. Matlock Civic Association is concerned about the Council's site delivery proposal SD7 on page 65 of the committee report, which states that, in appropriate circumstances, consider the release, removal of conditions, including any affordable housing requirements, from extant and/or unimplemented planning permissions. This seems to be an unnecessary invitation to applicants to relax the Council's planning policies, including the crucial requirements relating to affordable housing. Consequently, MCA requests that SD7 should be deleted. The case for omitting SD7 altogether seems to be all the stronger because in the year ending 31st March, the 411 net housing completions were the highest achieved for at least 30 years. The table on page 58 also shows that the Council will comfortably meet the government's housing delivery test in the period to the end of 2023. There is evidence that the housing demand is not exceeding supply in Derbyshire Dales district. So, rather than encouraging concessions to developers, there seems to be a case for the action plan to state that concessions against local plan environmental policies and affordable housing policies are extremely unlikely to be granted. Furthermore, it's stated on page 61 of the action plan that there is likely to be a continuation of readily deliverable sites coming forward in the next 5 years. Therefore, it seems likely that there's scope to properly assess traffic generation onto Chesterfield Road and the town centre and reconsider the surface water implications of any development in the light of recent flooding in Matlock before the Council commits itself to granting permission for the proposed major land release at Gritstone Road. And can I just add a similar point, that MCA are fully aware of the importance attached to the Council presenting a good case on land availability. But we think you can delete policy proposer SD7 without impairing the good case you make in the action plan. And so we just hope also that the member might move an amendment to delete SD7. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Walker. If you can just switch off the mic, please. Thank you. Next item is interests. If any members have interest to declare in items on the agenda, can they please do so?
Yes, I'm a member of Matlock Town Council, and item 17 on the agenda is about VE Day, and I know that they're planning to do something, so it's a non-financial interest.
Thank you. Any other interests?
I'm a member of the Matlock Civic Association, but there's no financial implication there.
Any others? No, that's it. Thank you very much. Number 5 is questions pursuant to Rule of Procedure 15. There aren't any questions, I can say that for this meeting. Number 6 is Derbyshire Dales Climate Change Strategy. Tim, would you like to sort of talk to us on that one?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report basically asks for £10,000 to procure some expertise to help the Council to develop a comprehensive strategy and action plan to help deliver our ambitions to be carbon neutral by 2030. The way that we envisage this working is that the expertise will be brought in to work with our existing climate change working group and with senior managers within the offices at the Council to develop the strategy and ensure that we've got ways embedded to deliver against it. We had hoped that we'd be able to present a method of working to you that basically worked with the County Council to provide a common approach across the whole of the county for public authorities. It's clear from conversations at Chief Executive level with the County Council that expertise, that sharing of expertise isn't going to be available to the Council anytime very soon. So officers are of the opinion that we need to push on with this and make sure that we've got the expertise in place to come up with an action plan to take us over the whole 10-year period for delivery. The proposal's been discussed at the Climate Change Working Group, and I think the group are broadly welcoming of the idea. We recognise that there is a role for the Climate Change Working Group to form the strategy, and to help to make sure that the strategy delivers, to have a kind of oversight to the strategy when it is in place. That's all I've got to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Purdy.
No questions, Chair. I prefer to move this because I think it's the most important element of... Sorry. Are we okay to carry on?
Oh, yeah, fine. Sorry, you know.
You okay for me to move it?
Yes, please.
I think it's very important that we take some action in securing officer resource. One of the pleas coming out of the climate change working group is for officer resource. We can't go into the detail of what's behind this at the moment, but I'm expecting to make another announcement in the near future. But I do want to say that it has been a frustrating road so far with Chief Exec and officers' efforts to get collaborative working with other authorities. We do have an offer from the Peak Park, which we're going to discuss, I think, on the 19th of March, which we wait with interest to see. But it's, as Tim said, we've come to realise that we really have to start putting some money where our mouth is to get this action policy change through. So I move the report, Chair.
Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to second this proposal, actually. Well, I think it is, as Councillor Purdy says, certainly urgent that we do something quite drastic. And I think this offer, there's £10,000 for this expertise, is going to be quite useful in terms of the progress that we make in the future. And I also ask that on recommendation 2 that the draft climate change strategy presents to early future meeting of this committee.
Councillor Burfoot, I've just noticed you haven't got your mic on.
Yes, can I ask that this draft Derbyshire climate change strategy be presented at an early future meeting of this committee? In other words, we don't want to be waiting another 6 months for it. I mean, we've waited long enough, as I think members have acknowledged in the past, since the motion was passed last summer, for any proposals to come forward. So I think the strategy needs to be a fairly early future meeting of this committee, not a long time. But I do believe that this money is going to be well spent in terms of the expertise provided for members of the working party, because they've been struggling so far to progress their proposals because of the lack of expertise and staff. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. Tim and other members will have to just bear with me, because I'm going to be rather challenging over this. I'm sorry about that. However, first of all, just to be pedantic, the recommendation are not asking me to agree with the use of £10,000. The reading of recommendation 1 is to procure expertise for the formulation of a climate strategy, and I would query the point about the strategy, incidentally. I realise that the £10,000 arises within the report, but that's not what I'm being asked to approve in terms of the recommendations. So that's the first thing. Could you perhaps just tell me, if it's not breaching confidences, where the £10,000 has arisen, why that specific amount, whose suggestion is it being used, and I'm assuming that it is for the services of an academic consultant, that incidentally, when this was first broached to me, I saw it in terms of this extremely learned resident was actually offering his services to us in a good neighbour capacity, not that we were going to hire him as a consultant. My second question is about the formal agreement over this. Are we going to have oversight of this? How many days consultancy is it actually being paid for here? What are the terms of the agreement that we're intending to spend £10,000 on. I'd like to make some contribution in a debate if one ensues, but they're my questions to begin with.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The Council's rules do allow the expenditure of £10,000. We are able to do that. As to where it's coming from, there's been some proposed we'll be putting some money into a reserve for corporate plan priorities. Now, obviously, declaring the climate emergency was one of the Council's biggest priorities, so it would seem sensible that the money would be used from there to pay for this particular piece of work. In terms of where the sums have come from, in discussions with various people who are known to myself and to Paul, this is a sum of money that's considered to be reasonable for the piece of work that we need to be done. You'll notice that in the legal comments, the comment is that procurement of external expertise will follow the Council's contract standing orders. So there is a set of rules we will have to follow to buy somebody in, rather than just handing a piece of work and some money to someone we happen to know. So that the process is controlled and scrutinised via that mechanism. As we understand it, the amount of work required is thought to be in the region of about 12 weeks. I think that answers all the questions that you've raised, Councillor Ratcliffe. Forgive me if I've not got them all.
No, it does indeed, and thank you for pointing out those points. I mean, clearly, I am extremely supportive of moving quickly on this, but I'm just hesitant that we don't trip over ourselves in actions that could be regarded as hasty. I make the point again that clearly, whilst it's beneficial to have someone's input into this, I'm just reluctant to feel that it's something that couldn't be done from within the council and use that money to pay and procure additional officer time, because there are ways of approaching this that I think, and there may be someone here this evening who knows better than I do about the internal workings of the climate working group, but it's my understanding that they're very keen on seeing this moving forward, not into a further strategy document, but into a delivery plan, and a plan that might begin from within the council, so that senior management officers within departments could be making their own individualised contributions into this that could then be drawn together by someone, again, from within the district. So, as I say, I'm still hesitant about using what is a fairly large sum of money outside of the council. You know, we've had discussions, and hopefully they will at some point in the future be fruitful, about partnership working and collaboration with the county council, etc., and about the shared costing of an officer who could bring us both together. Then, of course, there are the town and parish councils who are moving forward on this. So there's a whole district-wide grouping that could be brought together. So, as I say, I still have some reservations about approving the expenditure. Not that I wish to cast any aspersions whatsoever on the very learned academic gentleman who has volunteered his services, and quite clearly is going to, if approved, receive something perhaps you might consider typically an honorarium.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes,
I'm sorry, Councillor Ratcliffe, I need to correct you because what's going out in public is concerning me. These monies are not for Professor Martin.
Oh, they're not?
No. No, he's still being extremely kind and generous to us with his free neighbourly advice.
I wish that point's been made right at the beginning.
Well, you
I
came-
completely been under a delusion and a misreading of the report.
And you put the microphone on.
It did read very much as though that 10,000 was a sort of payment to him for his services, which is why there has been outside conversations going on, and I make no bones about saying that, about whether this was for 20 days consultancy or 15 days or 20, whatever. So I'm pleased that you made that statement, in an open forum. So could you just tell me precisely what the money is?
Excuse me, can you come through the chair?
We
don't want an open discussion.
You tell me.
I'll
Yes.
bring
Sorry, Chair, I'm preempting you.
I'm bringing Paul Wilson on
Yes.
this one.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Perhaps I can bring some clarity to this, because Councillor Radcliffe makes some valid points, but clearly there's a degree of confusion about what we're asking members to consider here. Following the declaration of the climate emergency, Derbyshire Dales, as most councils, is clearly looking to move forward on this agenda at pace. And there has been substantial discussions over the last few months through the Derbyshire Chief Executives Group in terms of how, as individual authorities, we can work better collaboratively together to achieve the ambitions that everybody subscribes to. Councillor Radcliffe is absolutely right. The early part of those discussions did focus upon the opportunity to have a shared resource which all authorities may pay into but would ultimately benefit from. Latest discussions have indicated that that is not likely to be deliverable anytime soon. That's not to say it won't be deliverable in the longer term, but it's certainly not going to happen in the next few months. So the discussions that have taken place is basically looking to bring a resource into the council for a short period of time to effectively pull together the work that the Climate Change Working Group have done, which is the initial roadmap. But really we need a piece of work which looks to how we are going to get carbon neutrality by 2030. So we need an action plan to 2030, not an action plan for 6 months or 12 months or 2 years. We need an action plan for the next decade.
Yeah.
So the discussions that we've had, and they are summarised in paragraph 1.6, have involved a whole host of approaches to different academic institutions. We have the input from Professor Martin, who is a Derbyshire Dales resident, but very, very knowledgeable on this topic. But it is certainly not the case that £10,000 will be payable to Professor Martin or anybody else named in this report. The Council's procurement standing orders require us to go out for submissions, to get tenders, to get prices based on expertise, and that expertise would be in accordance with a brief, which recommendation 1 is asking members to delegate to Tim Braun to formulate. So there will be a procedure we go through to get the best price, to get the best expertise, and then we will look to bring forward the development of that strategy sooner rather than later. And that will come back to members ultimately for approval. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Fawley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to put something out there, and I'd just like to have a response on it, really. If we're paying £10,000 for 12 weeks, could I suggest that we might think about actually employing someone ourselves? Because this is a long-term project, and if we get someone in, it's obvious that the other councils aren't moving quite as fast as we are. If we get someone in who could take this up straight away within a short time for us, we could perhaps use that person, and if the borough councils and district councils and county council want advice, they could come to us and give us some money for doing that. I don't know, I'd like to have your opinion on that.
Chair, I may. Certainly that is an approach that some councils have taken to date. The approach that we've taken is that rather than commit to the employment of an officer, which will be clearly significantly more than £10,000, we can get a strategy in place quickly, which, as Tim says, will be within the period of 12 weeks from appointment. Then that will set the action plan, which will then determine what we need to deliver against and what type of expertise we need to deliver. So appointing an officer before you know what it is you're trying to deliver is, if I may respectfully suggest, the wrong way around. What we need to consider is what skills and expertise we need to deliver the strategy, and then possibly bring in those skills and expertise at a later date. But we're certainly not ruling out the potential to potentially have an officer appointment of our own in due course. But there would be a very clear brief for that officer to deliver on the strategy which Council will have already have agreed on.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Thank you.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair.
My questions partly have been answered by Councillor Purdy. It's very disappointing that other local authorities aren't taking part and joining us. I think partnership working between councils with emergency climate action is necessary. We're all going down the same path and we're all going the same way. So rather than charge other councils for Professor Martin's work, we could, after he's done the work for us, we could then say to the let's join a partnership and we'll provide all this information for you and let's all join together to go forward together, because working together is far better, I think, and struggling on his own. And also, a question I'd like to ask is, has any government money come forward or any county money come forward to help us in this climate emergency? That's my questions, Chair.
Well, the answer to the second question is no. These are monies which the District Council will be using of its own to drive forward what is clearly the Council's key priority moving forward. In regard to Professor Martin, again, I must stress, this isn't necessarily a piece of work Professor Martin will be commissioned to undertake. Quite the opposite, I would suggest. Professor Martin has volunteered his support and assistance, but not in a paid capacity. We have a resident there, we have local universities who are prepared to help us, but we need a framework and a strategy in order that we can best guide that support moving forward. Because at the moment we've got lots of ideas, lots of suggestions, but it's pretty uncoordinated. And it needs coordination, it needs a strategy, it needs focus, and it needs driving forward. That's what this is all about.
I totally agree, Chair, with those comments. I think, but when we've got this conclusive information in our grasp, we should join with other councils and share what expertise we gather from Professor Martin. It's very, very good having come along with voluntary service, and we're moving in the right direction. But we're going to have to sooner or later join together in all this and go forward together, really. I know Derbyshire Daley Council was dragging the feet, but Amber Valley and other local councils are in the same frame of mind as us to get on with the job and complete it by 2030. So would it be worth once again asking them, Chair and Leader of the Council, that we could engage Professor Martin's information to them?
Do you want to come back, Paul?
No, finally, Chair, I mean, those discussions with partner organisations are continuing. The reason for bringing this report is because we want to move quicker and they are likely to move. That's the sole reason.
I would just like to add to that, Councillor Slack, that at Peak District National Park we have just started a committee, Climate Change Committee, which I'm on, and Councillor Chapman's on it as well. So, you know, we'd be very happy to work with Derbyshire Dales. Thank you. Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. Since we declared this climate emergency, we're about not far off a year down the road, and I just feel that we need to be, I'm reassured, I'm happy that the money will be used for the consultancy, but can we please ensure that it's done in like a smart way, so when it comes back we've got specific targets, measurable targets, achievable aims, relevant and time bound, so that we don't seem to be drifting. We can't afford to drift. People have got different perceptions on the climate issue, but I personally feel that we owe it to the residents of the Derbyshire Dales to act, and quickly. And can I also just 12 weeks, are we likely to have a plan in 12 weeks, or is that how long the consultancy is going to take? Because we haven't got a lot to show for what we've got. I know we've got a roadmap, and I'm no way criticising any member of the climate team at all, but we need to be moving forward. Can I also be reassured that what sits with me better is that it's not a strategy, it's a plan. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it's a plan. It's proffered up as a strategy. A strategy is a little bit woolly. If it's a plan, it's more permanent. I would like, if at all possible, for it to be a plan rather than a strategy. And I need reassurance that the consultancy, our group, there's going to be a holistic approach between the consultant who's going to consult with the members of the senior management teams, and also that's going to involve members of the climate working group as well. And hopefully David Chapman, Councillor Chapman, will be linked into that, and he'll coordinate it. And I'm sorry I had to ask lots of questions, Mr. Brown.
I'll try and remember them all. In terms of smart nature of the action plan, yes, fully agree. It's our intention that the strategy, come action plan, come delivery plan, identifies all the actions required to make the council net carbon neutral by 2030, the timescales within which those actions should be undertaken, and how we get there. So we want that, officers want that as well, and that's what will be specified to those who wish to bid for the contract. In terms of 12 weeks, we're led to believe 12 weeks worth of work is what will be required to form a draft strategy. So we're expecting delivery of it within 12 weeks from appointment. Please remember, we will have to go through a procurement process first of all, as has been widely debated already. And yes, we fully agree that the devil's in the detail with this. We do need to know exactly what it is we need to do, at what time, with what resources, in order that the council can tackle the issue and make sure we get to net zero.
Thank you. Councillor Swindle.
Can I just come back on one point?
Later. Councillor Swindle.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief, Chair, but just to go on Councillor Ratcliffe's points, don't worry, I made that assumption until I read right through the report. Yeah, I got to 1.8 and I felt quite happy with it. Councillor Slack's point, I think if we get on with this and start leading the way, you never know, other local authorities may take a view of us as leading the way and want to join in. But Tim, could I just ask about the 10 grand? How did you come to that figure? My question is that a worst case scenario? Are we expecting some change out of that maybe, or is the potential for coming back and asking for more? It's just a bit of detail on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. When we're looking into these things, we do some soft market testing, and we've basically got some preliminary estimates as the likely cost. £10,000 is at the upper end of what we expect it to cost.
Thank you.
Councillor Kirby.
Well, thank you for letting me come back to you. I think there's some loose points in the air that just need addressing. One is, I've got no problem with the plan at all, whether you call it a strategy or plan, and I'm confident that what we are looking at will come out as a plan. I've no objection to Councillor Barefoot's suggestion, the word early as an amendment in the recommendation, Chair, early meeting, that word inserted, no problem with that. Insofar as working with other authorities, we have done our very best. It's still though not finished business, because I'm going to a climate change summit at County Hall on the 3rd of March, and in talks with Councillor Barry Lewis, it's evident there's going to be a lot more learned from that climate summit at County Hall. And we're led to understand, and we'll learn more on that day, but we're led to understand that County Council want to go down the non-structural reform route, so you know about that. That is working towards collaborative working. County Council's opinion is that it's best to take the climate change agenda down that route, so I expect collaborative working to come eventually through that route, so it's not dead and finished. I can't think of any other more points that are loose in the air, but if there are, just let me know. But if you're not getting the answers from me, get them at the end of the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Corley, I've got your name down again. You have spoken once. Is this a question?
No, it's a point of information, actually.
Okay.
Just taking up what Councillor Ratcliffe said about the 10,000 not being in the recommendations, as we're going to vote on it, should we have that in there? Or is that just all right for it to just be sort of indicated that we might be voting on it?
Yes.
Well, the Chair recommendation 1 says seeking delegated authority to the Head of Regulatory Services to procure expertise. The Council's contract standing orders and our procurement rules allow expenditure of up to £15,000 as an officer decision. So the reason why this has been brought in this fashion is because that authority already exists.
I've just getting some clarification.
Councillor Wayne, you asked to come back on your original comment. Are you okay?
Yes,
okay, thanks very much. So there's no more speakers down. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Is that unanimous?
Yeah.
Unanimous, thank you. Before we move on to item 7, I've been asked by Councillor Pawley. Four of these reports have got particularly long reports on them, lots of paperwork, and she's asked if we can just pause a few seconds to allow members to get onto the reports. Councillor Pawley, can you let me know when you're ready then, please, to move on to 7?
Actually, it's after 7 that is...
Oh, is it? Oh, you've got 7 down here on your list you give me.
All of those are after.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 7, supplementary planning document developer contributions. This one's been deferred from the 16th of January council meeting. Mike, if you talk us through that, please.
Thank you, Chair. As the members will recall from what's set out in the report, the origins of the preparation of a supplementary planning document go back to December 2018 when Council made the decision not to pursue the introduction of the community infrastructure levy. We have been through a process of providing a workshop for members prior to consultation on the draft SPD took place in October and November last year. As a consequence of that, we received 114 representations, and each of those are documented in the appendix, along with the officer recommendations. And as I set out in the report, the key issues that were raised during the consultation relate to viability and the impact of the off-site contributions to the deliverability of development across the district, the impact on biodiversity and green infrastructure, the suggestion that there should be more of an emphasis on the historic environment in the SPD, and more in regards to the climate change agenda. Having reviewed the representations, the recommendations that we're presenting this evening make some minor changes to the content of the document, not significant changes, and with the exception of the point in paragraph 2.4 where we're suggesting that to ensure continued viability, that the enabling function an enabling fee that we're proposing to introduce through the SPD, rather than be 1%, that be reduced down to 0.5%. The consequences of that are set out in paragraph 2.4. But we are looking for members to adopt the SPD this evening and to take forward to use in the development, in the determination of planning applications from April, once we're outside of the judicial review period.
Thanks, Mike. Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move this, the report and the recommendations 1 and 2. I'd like to thank Mr Walker for coming along this evening to speak to us, and I'm pleased that we have made some minor changes due to the contributions that people have made after the consultation programme. As I said before, we declared a climate emergency on the 30th of May, and it's pleasing that, you know, climate change is a theme that's embedded in our local plan, and I would urge members to support this motion.
Councillor Bull.
Yes, thank you. This is a question. Sorry, Chair. Okay.
Right, yeah.
Well, a couple of questions. There's always been an issue with a lot of people about the 106 funding. And I think some of you will realise why, because it comes from my constituency 90% of the time. But I've been asked, is there a possibility, or is it somewhere where I can actually ring fence it upon this draft, this document that we've got now, the full clarity and transparency of how the 106 funds is negotiated, especially from the Ashbourne area development, which has had an adverse impact on our infrastructure, and how will it be deployed to remedy such impact and support the regeneration of Ashbourne?
That's my first question. Okay, another one. And then, if monies is not needed for the affordable housing, could the money be allocated to other community infrastructure projects, i.e. sports, open space projects, health and environment and town centre issues?
Mike, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll answer the second one first, if I may. And it might, in some respects, answer the first one at the same time as well. One of the things that we need to be clear of is what are Section 106 agreements for? They are a legal obligation on the developer to enter into a commitment to do something as a consequence of his submission or her submission of a planning application. They can only be used to mitigate a planning application. They can only be used where, in the case of without them, the planning application should be refused. So in other words, the things that go into a Section 106 agreement can only relate to things where a planning application would normally fall down on. So in the relation to affordable housing contribution and other infrastructure requirements, that particular planning application would normally fail if you didn't have that put into a Section 106 agreement. Okay? So the ability to switch from one thing to another is not there. Because what you're asking a developer to do is make a contribution to something which he needs to make a contribution to make that planning application acceptable. So you can't switch from affordable housing contribution and then say we don't need it to an open space contribution. That is not lawful. You cannot do that at all. So what would happen in those circumstances? Actually, the money would probably go back to the developer. We can't spend that money.
Councillor Wayne. Sorry, before you finish, Mike.
Sorry, in terms of the process is a fairly standard process. When a planning application comes to the planning committee will have identified to them those areas where a planning application is deficient and would require a Section 106 agreement to be entered into. We would normally set out what those requirements will be, and then those negotiations and discussions are taking place between the developer and the council as the person issuing the Section 106 agreement.
Can I just come back to that?
Yes, come back on that.
I'm sorry, this is the second bit of a question which you've fully explained on 106. But if 106 is from the development of a particular area, obviously Ashbourne on this circumstance, the development that's done in Ashbourne, and the 106 has been named for these particular issues, is that all for Ashbourne or is it for the whole of Derbyshire Dales? This is just clarity that I've needed, that I've been asked for from elsewhere.
Okay, this question has been asked a number of times, and the answer that we've given is the same, will be the same one. The whole purpose of what we do as a planning authority is for the benefit of the district as a whole. So whilst there may be requirements emerging from a particular site to meet a policy requirement within the local plan, it may be that having considered the circumstances surrounding the application and surrounding that particular location at a particular point in time, the discussions may be that we actually use that for the benefit of the district as a whole, not necessarily for Ashbourne or any other place where that application may come from.
Thank you.
Councillor Wayne.
Thank you. Yeah, I've read the report and it's good and comprehensive. However, tonight received an email, I think as most councillors have, from Mr Walker prior to the event, and I echo the comments made by Mr Walker in his early address, and as he's not going to receive a response to what the officer's views on the comments were, I personally have a problem with the SP7 because, sorry, the item 7. I don't think that we should be giving concessions to developers if they have bought land that is too expensive. Why should we then allow our residents to have substandard buildings and not the necessary infrastructure? Why should we do that to our residents when we should be doing it to the developers? Should stand and I totally am in agreement, and I would like to see an amendment put in where the actual comment made, the paragraph, permissions for substandard development, including reduced comment of the affordable housing, are unlikely to be granted. I would also like to know if it can be removed, if that can be put in the actual document, and also is it likely to ease officer time, please?
Can I ask, are you proposing an amendment?
Yes, sorry, I am, yeah. Yes, I would like an amendment that Mr Walker's comment was actually go into the plan.
Okay. Mike, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, Chair, in terms of the comments that Mr Walker's made this evening, both on item 7 and item 8, and we can deal with item 8 when we get to there in a little while. Effectively, what has happened this evening is to replicate the representations that were made to the District Council during the consultation period on both documents. My recommendations are very clear, and my comments are very clear within the report. In relation to the comments in relation to paragraph 3 of Mr Walker's statement about the substandard development and the amendment that Councillor Wayne is suggesting, this is the same comments that were made in the representations, and my comments are made on page 13 of the appendix. And in that particular comment, what we're saying is that the section on viability has been included to clarify the policies within the local plan. And that's what the purpose of a supplementary planning document is, to clarify the purposes of the local plan. Policy HC4 in the local plan makes it clear that where the provision of affordable housing is provided at a level that's below the normal requirement that we have in that particular policy, then we would seek a financial appraisal to justify the reduced provision. Now, we would undertake that through the officers of the district valuer, who work solely for the public sector. They are very familiar with the sorts of tricks of the trade that the development industry will try to pull. And one of the tricks of the trade will be to try and look at the land values and put the land values in. And we've had this in the past, where the land values have been put in, the developer has purchased them. We can't stop the developer purchasing the land at whatever price they want to purchase it at. What we can do is to see whether or not they've purchased it at a fair and reasonable amount, and that's been taken into account in the appropriate calculation of viability and the impact it then has on the financial contributions that we may well be seeking from the developer. So we already have the ability to get to a position where we can actually say to a developer, actually, you are not in a position to be able to, well, you're in a position where you actually can afford to make a greater contribution, because we do that assessment process. So my recommendation to you is that, as it is in the report, is that the paragraph that's been suggested does not need to be within the supplementary planning document, because we already have circumstances where we can actually deal with that without having to make any changes.
Lee, would you like to comment on the proposed amendment, please?
Chair, thank you very much. I didn't want to jump in and interrupt Mike with his explanation, but I just want to clarify what actual amendment you are proposing. I have the email sent around earlier regarding item 7, and there's 7 paragraphs on that. So what is the actual amendment you're proposing?
Well, basically, what he read out that Mr Walker read out, I totally agree with, and I would like that to be within the amendment. So, yeah, number 3.
Number 3.
Yeah.
So you're asking that.
Yeah, it's in bold. It's emboldened.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So what I'm trying to get over is that I would like that to be the amendment, not the whole kit and caboodle, just that.
So you're wording an amendment in such a way that this wording should be added to the supplementary planning document.
Yeah. And also, can I just, Mr Hayes, you didn't answer the question, would it save officer time or not?
The simple answer is it wouldn't, no, because we'd still have to go through a process of of assessing the application in the same way that we did it in any particular in the normal circumstances dealing with a planning application, so it wouldn't save any time at all.
Okay. Councillor Morley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to second the motion, or second the report as is. Congratulate Mr Hayes, as usual, on a very comprehensive piece of work. So there's a second and down on the table now. And also to make a point that we do seem to be getting into the habit of trying to make amendments at committee stage, and it takes a lot of time. We've had the papers for some time. I would suggest respectfully to colleagues that if you're not happy with any of the report, the time to do it is to contact the officer and discuss it before we get to here, because otherwise we'll go around in circles trying to rewrite every report and we'll still be here at this time tomorrow. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. I have a simple question coming up, but I just want to make a comment on what has been debated or discussed so far. It does seem to me that what we were presented by Mr Walker was extremely laudable, and the ethos of it, the sentiment, is something I wholeheartedly agree with. But there are reasons, as it were, why I don't think that would be permissible for us. First thing that strikes me is that it would be in contradiction with the local plan. Our local plan sets out very clearly the policy of approach towards affordable house development and viability. The SPD is meant to be a document that enhances and adds to it, not that it challenges it. So I think on a legal basis, I don't think we could put something like this in. But I have to say, I do fully agree with it, because it only became clear to us over the last part of the previous council that what we were dealing with on that policy inclusion on number percentages was not a target figure but an aspiration. 30% is not set in stone. My word, it should be, but it wasn't. So clearly the viability assessment that tries to get the maximum achievable on these sites is something that we are very reliant on and should be using wherever there's a question of non-production of affordable homes. But as I say, whilst my heart fully agrees with this, my head thinks I don't think we can. In fact, I know we can't. I know we can't have this. And a great shame it is, I have to say, because this viability is going to be with us right till the end of this this local plan period, and there's some really major developments coming along, I have to say. But a simple question for you, Mike, if I may, is in the documents on housing that I've been reading on tonight's agenda, I get the impression that our baseline for affordable houses is 11 units or more. The government in their NPPF state it's 10. Now, I always thought that the government had the whip hand when it came on things like policy statements like this. So which one is it that we're sticking to? 10 or 11? 10. Oh, right. So that's the slight change, isn't it?
The NPPF came into effect after the policies in the local plan, so that supersedes the policies in the plan.
Ah, I thought so. Right. So that change has been made.
Microphone, Mike.
In our local plan?
We haven't made the change in the local plan, but the impact of it.
As long as the developers know, it's 10, I'm happy.
Councillor Pauly.
Yes, I haven't any further questions, thank you.
We've got an amendment on the table, Councillor Wayne's amendment. Do we have a second?
I second it.
We've got a second, okay. Any other speakers?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to you.
Okay,
Affordable housing is used to be 45%, as we all know, and now it's down to 30%. Unfortunately, I do agree with Mr. Hayes that 30% is the legal requirement. But unfortunately, in many cases recently, we haven't achieved that. Recently, on the Ashbourne Airfield, it was only 11%. It's rather contradictory, really. We're supposed to stick to 30% and we don't do it. We should do it. It should be set in stone, like Councillor Ratcliffe said, but we don't, and we're letting ourselves down because it's suggested in later that if we get a developers slacking off and we don't achieve the housing rate as we want to, affordable housing will have to be reduced again. I think this is a completely, utterly wrong thing to do. If we go into next year, if we don't get a deal, Brexit deal, we could be in severe problems and inflation could be coming in and economic disaster could be looming. And if that happens, we will need affordable housing like never before. People won't be able to afford to put mortgages down on big properties. We will need affordable housing, social housing. We should not, in no way, detract from 30% affordable housing. It's wrong to do it, and we will regret it if we keep doing it. We've done it too many times over the last few years, and we should now stand on that ground of 30%. So, Chair, I'm sorry to put this sharply, but it needs to be put sharply. Thank you, Chair.
I'm going to bring Paul in to respond to that. Please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think members need to understand what their own local plan policies are, because it's never been a legal requirement to hit a particular figure, because national planning policy doesn't allow you to do that. Your current local plan sets a target of 30%, your previous local plan set a target of 45%, but it's always subject to viability. You just need to read national planning guidance it comes all the way through it. And if you try to stick to a particular target and refused every application that didn't meet it, you would never see the amount of housing development that you actually need to accommodate. Your affordable housing problems would get far worse. The government wouldn't hit its housing targets nationally. It just doesn't work like that. So it's always been a target, but viability is always a consideration that has to be taken into account. You will never get away from that, I'm afraid. I can perfectly understand the reasons why members want to maximise affordable housing, but in the Derbyshire Dales, particularly on some of the challenging sites that we've got, the brownfield sites, it will very, very rarely, if ever, be deliverable. So is it more important to get some houses and some affordable housing and see those sites developed, or see no development at all and see the whole area stagnate? Because that is the stark choice that you have.
Can I come back?
Thanks, Paul. Can I just bring Lee in first, just to clarify this amendment situation?
Thank you, Chair. Just before I went to a vote, and also because we were referring to a document that everyone's seen and we're actually on tape, I just wanted to clarify that everyone is happy with the wording of the amendment. At the moment, we have the original proposals first and seconded, and we have an amendment which, by the looks of it, would be amending recommendation 2. And if you're happy with this wording, that the revised development contributions supplementary planning document, SPD, attached to Appendix 2, be adopted, subject to the inclusion of the paragraph permissions for substandard development, including reduced content of affordable housing, are likely to be granted on the basis of development profitability and viability if prospective applicants have not properly taken account of planning policy requirements before purchasing land for development and bought the land at a too high a price. The community should not pay in the form of poorer infrastructure, inadequate provision for social housing and development which is poor quality and or not enhancing the character and appearance of the area. Is everyone happy with that wording? Thank you.
Councillor Slack, I believe you want to come back on
thank you.
what you were saying.
Thank you, Paul, for explaining that. But morally, we should stick at 30% morally. So I'll put it that way. And if we don't, we will regret it in future. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Burfoot.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
I have a number of points actually in questions. First of all, in terms of the infrastructure delivery plan, highway improvements I think are an important aspect of that, which we don't always get delivered with planning applications. And Severn Trent water improvements to capacity, we definitely don't get that on a regular basis. We rely on these statutory utilities to give the right response, but quite often you see when houses are being built that they're not delivering the capacity, or rather the capacity is being exceeded more often than not. Flooding and drainage is something that we've obviously been concerned about locally in Matlock and other places in the district. Flood defence schemes and primary schools. Those are two other things which need to be very carefully considered. Obviously in terms of viability, I think as has been said, exemption should be an exception to the norm, and not it should be very, very rarely accepted. I think probably Quarter Quarry was one example because of the immense costs of remediation of the derelict land there and the unknown quantity in terms of the bulk of the quarry after the first phase has been completed. Another question I'd ask is, how will public open space be provided given the shortfall at present? I think informal play space is usually, in my experience, on new developments, on car parks and other bits of land that have been left over from the development. I think wildflower meadows are needed for biodiversity, and it's important that these things are enforced. I think one of the problems we have with planning in this district is poor enforcement of conditions and schemes when they've been completed. I disagree fundamentally about the provision of amenity green space not to be sought because of the natural surroundings that obviously a lot of our developments have around them, being in a rural area. But these areas, of course, are usually in private ownership, and I don't think landowners usually welcome children playing football on their fields. Allotments, that's something I've been asking the County Council and District Council about for years. We should be discussing with the County Council developing a site before house building is proposed on these sites instead. There's precious little land left in our district, I suspect, around our towns where allotments can reasonably be provided. Maintenance of public open space, it's okay, but who enforces it? Are management companies in new developments? Are they delivering what you might call a practical long-term scheme in perpetuity? I think that's something that needs to be very carefully considered to ensure that residents of these new estates do get open space which is going to be maintained in perpetuity. Education, do our planners just take, this is something I feel very strongly about, do our planners just take the County Council's word for granted? For instance, the Quarter Quarry site, houses there have been allocated to St Giles School in Matlock, which is very remote and on the opposite side of town, which will add to road congestion in Church Street and Matlock Green and be totally unsustainable.
Excuse me, Councillor Burford, could I just ask you what the question is, please?
Well, not just questions. Questions, and I've asked some questions. Are we only on questions then? Because other members of
No. I thought it was a question. Sorry.
Oh no, yeah. Well, I've asked how will public open space be provided? Allotments, where? Maintenance of public open space, who enforces them? Education. I think, as I say, I think that our planners often take the County Council's word for granted. There's Quarter Quarry, for instance, allocated to St Giles School, which is totally unsustainable. The Gritstone Pinewood site, if it's ever given planning consent, that's been allocated to Castle View School with an extra classroom, despite the appalling and dangerous access to parking. I understand that the officer who recommended that didn't even know where Castle View School was, let alone of a very narrow, inaccessible road. Traffic and transportation. That's very dubious and not straightforward because of indirect access, indirect impact.
Councillor Burford, I think you're straying away from the point of the
page 41 is
meeting.
that one, page 46 is.
And I think you've gone over the 5 minutes. We haven't been timing it because I thought it was a question, but I think you've gone over the 5 minutes.
Well, I think other members have spoken for quite a long time earlier on the agenda, so.
Well, it's okay to go over 5 minutes if it's a question, but this isn't. Doesn't sound like.
Well, finally, can I just say that the 10 years minimum for withholding developer contributions, I think that is what's needed. I think 5 to 10 years is totally unreasonable. I would like to know why 5 years is considered reasonable, because new schools and other GP practices, for instance, take a long time to negotiate and to provide.
Thank you. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. All I would do with some members would take Councillor Morley's advice and ask questions before they come to full council, because that was a ramble, Councillor Barefoot. Meaningless. I didn't understand a word of what you said or any points you raised. I think members who have been long in this council as well should know better to attack affordable housing on this authority. We've always punched above our weight in this authority, as you well know, Councillor Slack. We've always had an excellent record. Okay, the SPD needs to be looked at, and it's going to be looked at. But I think to infer as well that the planning, design or build is inferior because of what Mr Walker said is a bit of a slur on the planning committee and our officers, so I don't accept that. Please, members, can we have questions to officers before we come to the night's meeting, because it prolongs it and prolongs it. These good officers have been here since 9 o'clock this morning. We don't want to listen to rambles. I'll be short, Chairman, we won't be supporting the amendment.
Okay, well, no more speakers down. We've got an amendment on the table. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour of the amendment? 4. All against the amendment? Any abstentions? No. So the amendment's failed. Again, we haven't any speakers down, so the recommendations have been moved and seconded. All in favour? Against? Abstentions? No. Okay. So that has been moved. So we'll move on to item 8, and as Councillor Paula requested, we'll wait a few seconds while members have a chance to get it up. Councillor Paula, if you could let me know when you're ready, please.
I'm running the paper. It does take a lot of time to do, sorry. Yeah, we're ready.
You're okay. So item 8, housing delivery test action plan. Over to you again, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very similar report in terms of its structure and format to the previous one. Members back in early last year agreed to the council preparing a sort of an informal housing delivery test action plan to try and set out how the district council is going to take forward the continued development and continued completion of housing to contribute towards meeting the government's target of 300,000 new homes a year. The draft housing delivery test action plan was published for consultation in October and November again, I think it was, I can't remember now. And the representations that were received from that are set out in Appendix 1. The main issues that we had as a result of the consultation relate around 4 issues. One is around the assumptions we made in the calculations on the Gritstone Road site at Matlock, the issue about concessions on the historic environment and affordable housing, the principle that development should come from brownfield and advanced greenfield, and there were some queries raised about some sites that hadn't been included within the calculation of the 5-year housing line supply. All of the officer comments and recommendations are set out in the appendix. One of the issues, and I shall deal with it now as it's dealt with in the report, is in relation to the amount that we have assumed for Gritstone Road as 165 dwellings. Whilst that site does not have the benefits of planning permission, it is an allocation within the local plan. The application is being pursued by the developer at this moment in time, and clearly there is a debate to be had about that, but given the momentum with that, and given the fact that at a previous appeal where we made assumptions about that site which was accepted by the inspector, we think 165 dwellings is an appropriate amount to include within the calculation of our 5-year supply. Taking all things into consideration, we do not think there are any substantive points made within the representations that necessitate any modifications to the plan which was subject to consultation. So therefore recommended for approval for you this evening.
Councillor Alderson.
Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations. Thank Mike for all his hard work in preparing this very comprehensive report. And I hope that members, although we do welcome questions and a debate, will be circumspect with their questioning.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Some questions, if I may, please, Mike. First of all, on brownfield and greenfield sites, is there no way, retrospectively, why we can't prioritise brownfield over greenfield?
Councillor Burford, can you turn your mic off, please?
Is it more a practical, pragmatic delivery question?
Mike.
There's two aspects to that. Firstly, there's no government policy which says that we should deliver brownfield before greenfield. Whilst they suggest that we have to make effective use of brownfield sites, and the local plan itself, as you well know, there's over 60% of actually the allocations are on brownfield sites.
So bottom line, it can't be enforced?
No, correct. Okay.
Second question, again on the same subject. How do we de-risk brownfield sites to further their advancement as development, housing development areas?
Well, that's effectively what the action plan is all about. It's about trying to ensure that...
I'm sorry, can I just simplify it for you then? What is the process of de-risking, duplication?
What we're trying to do with the action plan is to ensure that we continue to have a continuous pipeline of development coming forward. So at the moment, what we've got is a situation where the vast majority of the developments that are coming forward are on the greenfield side. There are some big sites within the local plan which are brownfield sites, which are more complicated, which will take a lot of work to get to a point where they actually bring forward housing development which is needed. The things that we are doing as part of the de-risking process are some of the things that we've set out within the action plan. Some of the things that we are looking at are having a discussion, in addition to sort of thinking about things like compulsory purchase where necessary. This is a multidisciplinary team approach where officers from various departments, myself, Rob, Paul, Giles, are all looking at individual sites, because a lot of the sites we've got left now, the brownfield sites, they're not just housing sites, they're both employment sites as well. Talking to the landowners, talking to agencies, talking to those people that might actually be able to help the landowners get to a position where they might have some funding available to try and get those sites brought forward.
Right.
Because I was then going to just ask on that very discrete point that you've just mentioned, in fact, whether there was anything within D2, N2 funding that might be used in order to support, which is often something which is something of an obstacle, the decontamination of brownfield.
D2 N2 have got a very specific focus, and that's around economic development and economic growth. If there was some economic benefit, then it may be that they have got an opportunity to help in de-risking the sites. What we're finding at the moment is that Homes England are having a much more sort of vested interest, if you like, in looking at some of these sites and working with some of the landowners to try and de-risk them in that way. The government has put a lot of money into housing, significant money, into the Homes England agency, with a particular view to actually getting residential developments off the ground. And they have got a very wide remit. Rob can hopefully confirm this, a very wide remit in terms of their involvement and interest in making sure that development sites get off the ground, particularly those ones that are a bit more complicated and might need a bit of pump priming to actually overcome the sort of initial costs of getting decontamination, doing the decontamination works.
Thank you, Mike. And I've just one final question, if you'll allow me, Chair.
Certainly.
It's a double header in a way. First of all, what are the appropriate circumstances whereby certain conditions might be removed to allow the development of housing? I'm referring particularly, of course, to that which Mr. Walker raised in his address to you. And would you not agree with he and I that the inclusion of a paragraph, albeit in a report, should certainly not enter any formal document of this council, in that this, as it stands, appears to give weight to developers to use the sort of open barn door principle, if I can say that, of claiming that they have circumstances such that they should be excluded from those constraints that we would normally apply. I'm just concerned that something like this doesn't enter the public arena for developers to take advantage of.
Chair, in terms of that last particular comment, that comment and that potential way forward is actually already in the public arena, because we've been having public consultation on the document. So the development industry and others, including the Civic Association, have had the opportunity to consider the content of the particular document. The representations and the Office of Comments that we've made in relation to those are very clear. The default position is not to release conditions or to release Section 106 agreements. It's very much to try and keep them.
Absolutely.
But from an original scheme to an amended scheme, for example, there might be circumstances that suggest that.
Okay, I'm sorry to quickly come back, but so what do you envisage as an appropriate circumstance?
Well, the appropriate circumstances may be where the District Council consider that it's appropriate to see the development of a site brought forward over and above. And it goes back to the debate that we just had about that whole issue,
I'm following
where, you know, you've got a decision to make as an authority as to whether or not you want to see the development of a site come forward.
Get some houses rather than none.
Absolutely. And the government is very clear that they would like to see the development industry deliver housing.
Okay.
Councillor Froggatt.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to second the motion. Thank you.
Any other speakers?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Burford. Yeah.
I do resent the suggestion that questions need to be asked before the meeting when we get seven days notice of a 200-odd page report. By the time you've read through it and phrased all your questions, you've got probably 1 day to get your questions into offices, which wouldn't be much of an advantage, I don't think. In terms of what Mike's just been talking about, SR7, I do feel that that is probably an unnecessary clause which can be deleted, but you know, I think the only exception that I can think of where development does require some exemption from this affordable housing requirement is probably called a quarry, which certainly wouldn't go ahead without this sort of concession. I mean, that's a unique site, it's badly contaminated, and certainly wouldn't go ahead without these concessions or the perhaps the flats that are being built at the moment that are rather contentious in Matlock. So I would say only where the viability test proves that site preparation costs are such a burden on the development to make it totally uneconomical without that. But otherwise, I think that clause should be deleted. So I'd like to propose an amendment to that effect. I've also got a number of questions. On page 57, is it sufficient to complete construction of new homes to satisfy the government's 5-year requirement, even if they cannot be sold and parts of sites left stagnant, as is the case in some that I know? Therefore, site developments are not completed as predicted. As the report says, 411 new dwellings were completed last year, the highest for 30 years. So we will easily meet the government's target. That's one question. In terms of planning permission granted for greenfield sites outside the local plan allocations, do these not serve to further preclude the development of brownfield sites because of competition and financial viability? Therefore, the delivery situation could become even worse. At present, it appears that Corder Quarry is the only former mineral site actually actively being developed. And so another question is, related to this to some extent, why do some smaller and possible windfall sites appear to be stalled? For instance, Harveydale Quarry in Matlock, where I think the long scheme was approved actually. The RBS site in Matlock, and even a very small one of the Burnham Inn, just in Daley, and Whiteley Nursery in Tansley. Nothing's going ahead for no good reason as far as I can see. So I would also ask if, in terms of Ashbourne Airfield Link Road, are we confident that, and the future development that's linking to, are we confident that prospective developers are going to go ahead with that scheme in its entirety? Because it seems a bit... oh, sorry, that's the next item, isn't it? Sorry, delete that one, yeah.
Yes, in terms of the position on the 5-year supply, the situation is that we have to identify those and make assumptions about a number of things that go into that there's a number of things that go into the calculation. Firstly is what's the requirement, secondly is how many have been built. So the more we build in the first part of the plan, the less the requirement becomes going forward. But we still have to then factor in a buffer, which we're required to do. But what we do is we look at not only what commitments there are, we've got to make some reasonable assumptions about those commitments, and the government's very clear now that it doesn't think that we should be putting into the assumptions anything which isn't going to happen over the next 5 years. So if we have got intelligence or we make reasonable assumptions about the fact that sites aren't going to come forward, so if you look at what we put in for this calculation, there are a number of sites that aren't in there where there's no assumption. So there's nothing in there for Ashbourne Airfield, for example. There's nothing in there for Halldale Quarry, for example, because those are sites that are complex sites, will take a lot longer to come forward than other sites that we have included within that, and we think have got a reasonable opportunity to be delivered. But the more we deliver, and the earlier we deliver it, it means that we're front-loading what happens. So we've got to be mindful of what's going to happen beyond 5 years as well. We can't just focus on the 5 years. We've got to look at beyond the 5 years, and that's what this document is trying to say to you, is that we're doing okay at the moment, but we cannot take our foot off the gas. We need to make sure that we keep going forward with the work we're doing in all different strands to make sure that those sites that we've got allocated in the plan are being brought forward. Because if we don't get these sites that are in the plan brought forward, and we can't be confident that they're brought forward, and we don't then achieve a 5-year supply, then it means that we're in a situation where we may well have to release sites that you don't want to release. And the developers then get in a position where they've got the upper hand over us as a planning authority, and that is not good planning as far as we're concerned.
We'll just come back briefly.
Well,
we don't want to be in
just
an even
briefly,
worse position. We don't want to be in an even worse position then, because if a greenfield site is approved and then is implemented, it'll further preclude the development of brownfield lands. It's just this chicken egg situation. The demand is going to, well, the supply is going to outstrip the demand in terms of the viability of brownfield sites. The more greenfield sites that are approved and implemented, because obviously they're far cheaper to develop, and therefore, in fact, I think I'm right in saying that Quarter Quarry is the only really brownfield site. Obviously, brownfield sites being developed in the district in recent years. Others are probably, certainly quarry sites. There aren't any others that have been developed as derelict or brown, if you like, as Quarter Quarry in Matlock. And there are others, obviously, other quarries in Wirksworth. You think about the huge developments that are allocated to local planning Wirksworth. How are those ever going to go ahead if they're always competing with greenfield sites elsewhere?
Two points. First point, Quarter Quarry's taken nearly 20 years to get off the ground. So, and there's been a lot of ups and downs with that site, and we're in a position at the moment where there's a reasonable headsway, a reasonable amount of movement, support for brownfield sites to be assisted to get off the ground. So we've got to do what we can as officers and as an authority to make sure those brownfield sites are delivered. That is part of the plan that you've approved as an authority, which we are collectively charged with trying to deliver. Now, there was a lot of debate when we were preparing the plan about the proportions of brownfield and greenfield, and I've said to Councillor Ratcliffe before, we've got over 60% of our allocations in the local plan on brownfield sites. Of the greenfield sites that we've got, the vast majority of them are now getting to a point where they've either started on site or getting permission, or there's a planning application in. There's not many where there isn't that sort of situation where they're moving forward. So to deliver our plan, we need to focus on getting those brownfield sites up and running and putting our efforts and energies into delivering those. If those sites don't come forward, then we will then need to look at how we make up any shortfall. And there isn't many brownfield sites from the work that we've done available. So, at some point in the future, we may have to make some difficult decisions about the allocation of sites in the future if the brownfield sites don't come forward. So that's why there's a lot of emphasis being put on making sure that collectively we are putting our energies into working with whoever we need to work with, whether it be the landowner, the agents, the developers, the agencies, to make sure that those sites are moving forward. And then at the moment, the situation is those sites are moving forward because we're being proactive in the approach that we're taking. If we weren't being proactive, those sites could just sit there, and may just sit there. And that's not good for us as a planning authority in terms of the plan that we've got adopted.
Before you speak, Councillor, I'm going to bring Lee in again to clarify this amendment issue.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make sure that everyone's in agreement of the wording of the amendment. It looks like it's an amendment to number 2, and that would be the housing delivery. Sorry.
I think I'll cancel that proposal.
You cancel that proposal? Okay then, thank you. The amendment to be withdrawn.
Okay. Councillor Hobson.
Chair, I'm pleased that the amendment's been withdrawn. I would just like to say Mike's been speaking now, answering very detailed questions for almost an hour, and I really do not think it's fair that this level of detailed question should be happening in a council chamber. We've all had time to read the documents. Mike answers emails very quickly, but this level of detail is too much. As Mike says, this is the local plan that we've approved. 60% of brownfield sites we're going to be building on.
Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, Councillor Wayne is next.
Thank you.
Do you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I did.
Oh.
And in reply to what I've just heard,
Sorry, as Councillor Wayne at the moment. I'll come back to you later,
Will you defer to me? Just to allow me.
I'm sorry, it's Councillor Wayne next. We must carry it.
And
keep your
you're
thought.
willing to defer to me, aren't you?
Keep your thought held, and we'll say what I've said, and then I'm sure. Yeah.
You were next, Councillor.
Right. Thank you. I'm a bit shocked by the patronising approach coming from certain members across there. I was on the phone to Mr. Hayes yesterday for half an hour. Once I'll get to the dizzy heights of people opposite, maybe I will take some advice from you. But at the moment, I'm not inclined to. Thank you. However, moving on. Mr. Hayes, I'd just like to raise a point that you brought up about the Gritston Road site. You said earlier on that things will be moving on. People that may or may not be watching this marvellous transmission, can they seek some reassurance that, I don't know whether you live in the area, but you won't have gone unnoticed that there's been a substantial amount of flooding in this area, and there's a serious issue of runoff from water. And the Environment Agency have reported upon this, and the local flood team have reported upon this, and it's been raised to the planning authority up here. The people are seeking some reassurance, not comments that things will move forward. What they're wanting to do is to know that this matter will be dealt with fairly and equitably, and things will move on. And if it gets voted in, it gets voted in. However, one of the issues that the gentleman earlier on, Mr. Walker, raised was in relation to a reassessment and an area-wide travel plan and things like this in the interim period, because it's my understanding that the actual building on the Airfield estate and the ones opposite the Whitworth Hospital aren't included. I'd like to know when they will be included in the local plan, because that could total 400 houses, and would it not be pertinent for this organisation to engage in a full assessment of flooding and also a full assessment of travel in Matlock for feasibility, so that we're not going into things blind and we're not leaving ourselves open to any issues. Thank you.
Chair, in terms of the issue about the sites that were not included, the comments were made in the representations during the consultation on this particular document. And the reasons that the sites weren't included was because at the time that we undertook the assessment of the 5-year supply against the NPPF definition of deliverability, those sites, as far as we were concerned as officers, could not be guaranteed to be delivered within the next 5 years. So without the certainty, without the understanding that they were going to be coming forward, either in whole or in part, we took a view that it was more conservative, with a small c, to take them out, because what we didn't want to happen is as we've had in the previous appeal situations, where an agent on the other side, on the opposition side, will take officers like myself or John Bradbury through those sites and say, should or should they not be included? And then a decision had to be made as whether they are or not included. We've taken a much more pragmatic view this time around about taking sites out where we think there is no reasonable prospect in the next 5 years of them being delivered. We will be doing an assessment again at the beginning of April. At the beginning of April, we will review where we are with all of the sites, including those ones that have moved forward in the last 12 months, and make a view as to whether or not they will be included within the calculation in full or in part. In the housing delivery test action plan, what we did say is that we think we will be okay on the intelligence that we've got, but until we get to that point of doing the assessment, I can't say whether we will or we won't, but the intelligence suggests that we will be okay, but what we will be doing is we're assessing all of the sites that should be included within that calculation at the beginning of April.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start calmly. If no one has seconded this, I'm perfectly willing to second that we accept this very good report.
It has been seconded.
Thank you for that. There are very few members, I think, and I count myself amongst that small number, that outside of meetings come and speak with officers, ask them questions, sometimes in perhaps an irritating way, but though I never mean it to be that, and engages with the topics that I think are paramount for this council. One of the chief and most significant issues and most important issues is that of housing. And one of the other things that I'm conscious of is that this meeting, since the introduction of the video camera, is a public forum. And people are listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, that's a good question. I would have asked that. I'm interested in what, now some might not be, but there will be people out there who are taking that approach. I don't think it's incumbent on us simply to dismiss these often detailed and sometimes complex reports that the officers present us with. It's up to us to engage with them and show that we've read them and show that we've read them in the minutiae of the report. So I'll continue to do that, and no one is going to stop me from doing what I feel is not only in the best interest of myself as a participating councillor, but the best interest of this council and those residents, the public out there, for whom these issues are important.
Can I just point out, Councillor Radcliffe, that we've got 13 items on the agenda.
I realise that, but that's not my fault. I didn't compile this agenda.
After an hour and 40 minutes, we haven't even done 3 yet. Just make that point.
Chair, I'm not being critical, but you as chair have the facility for guillotining the length. You could easily defer.
I don't think I have that power as yet.
I think you do, but
not yet.
No, it is on the. It is on. We are heading that way, but it's not yet.
But you do conduct a very good committee.
Thank you. Can I bring Lee in?
Just to clarify that point, the passing of the 3-hour guillotine won't be adopted until the new constitution is adopted. However, you've still got the 2.5 hour. You have to vote to go past the 2.5 hour. But if you vote to go past that, then there's no end point under the constitution.
Chair,
okay. Councillor Purdy. Yeah.
We're not trying to stifle debate. What we're trying to do is speed things along because we care about our officers.
Councillor Gamble.
It's a general question, really. It's, if we didn't pass this, what would change? Because it seems to be a report that basically says this is the amount of houses that have been passed, this is the amount that have been built. I mean, presumably most planning applications have the usual, have to be started development within 3 years, and that's probably the end of the process in terms of how much we can input into whether things are built or not. So I was just really looking for what was the why do we need to actually even pass this?
The simple answer is that we have passed the housing delivery test. Had we failed the housing delivery test, it would have been a mandatory requirement for us to actually prepare one of these action plans. But because we have passed the housing delivery test, we didn't have to prepare one of these. But advice from the planning advisory services that it's good practice to have an action plan such as this, so that actually it can focus the minds of the authority in terms of focusing on making sure that we are clear that there is a priority in terms of delivering the houses that meet the government's target. Okay, and there is a whole raft of different ways that we set out in the action plan for the authority to actually take that forward.
Is that it, Mike?
I think it probably is for the moment. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so with no more speakers, it has been moved and seconded. All in favour?
No, they're just
Counting.
yeah.
How many?
It's Councillor Gamble we can't see.
Yeah, Councillor Gamble. Oh.
Are you
Do I not
voting?
put my hand up? No, I'm not voting.
No?
I'm going to abstain.
Oh, right, okay.
Against? Abstentions? Councillor Gamble, abstentions?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to make a change to the order now and bringing forward item 16. The reason is that we've got a consultant with us, Mr. Aaron Elliott, who is here to answer any questions you might have, which Rob couldn't. Might not be able to, shall I say. Item 16, so over to you, Rob. Building new council housing. Item 16. It's not one of the long ones, Councillor Crawley, so should be straight into it.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, we've got to get to it.
Oh, okay. Tell me when you're there. Tell me when you're there.
I'll make a brief start then. So I'd like to welcome Aaron to the meeting. He's been supporting the council with his team from Altair and the consultancy that we've had grant support to appoint in the past, following an LGA award that we put in for a couple of years ago. So this is a project that's been in incubation for quite some time. We've been to the commercial board several times to present our business plan, and this report seeks committee's approval to refer the item to full council for a wider discussion and sign off on such a, I guess, what is quite a big departure from our normal housing enabling role. So, as I said, we have a business case and we've developed some specifications with support from Altair, and that's been very valuable to us. Obviously, we've not been owning or managing housing for quite some time, and bringing in best practice from other councils and through Altair's experience has been very valuable. The project seeks to appoint a development agent and a managing agent to do the vast majority of work on behalf of the district council through a contractor. And we look to spread the risk in the programme. All development has risk, unfortunately, but we are mixing that with new build, taking back into use empty homes, and the purchase of Section 106 properties through what is a modest programme for a council of our size. And I know other councils in the area are also developing the same sorts of proposals. Obviously, you know, I'm the continuing optimistic, and we would be able to develop more. But in terms of putting our toe in the water and starting from scratch, this is a programme which your officers have recommended. The idea is also to generate a long-term revenue stream to the council, something which I know which all members will be keen to hear about, and also to respond to climate change. So we're looking to invest an additional £10,000 in properties to bring up the standard of our energy efficiency within the stock that we would own. We do need to make applications to Homes England and the regulator of social housing to register with them, and we will be doing some soft market testing over the next few weeks with potential contractors to test out some of the principles we've put in our appendices. And you can see in the specifications there are some gaps, and that's intentional because we want to check and test that what we're asking contractors to do they can actually achieve. So, so both of us here, we're happy to answer questions, but I'm sure Aaron, having sat through the earlier debates, will be keen to make his contribution as well. Thank you.
Yes, I'll just add that, Aaron, you have a train to catch, I believe, don't you, which is one of the main reasons. Councillor Purdy.
I'll defer to Councillor Ratcliffe first.
Oh, well, thank you, Leader, because I was going to move this. This is an absolutely laudable, even if it is, and I think, you know, perhaps you're being yourself slightly modest when you talk about being because, you know, from acorns, great oak trees grow. And I think you deserve congratulations for bringing it forward and now pushing it forward to delivery, hopefully later this year. I have two questions, if I may. First of all, can you just reassure me that on completion and at some future date, these will not be subject, or they'll be protected from the right to buy?
That's a good question to start with.
Oh, that's why I've asked.
At the moment, right to buy in our existing council housing stock as it was, there was protected right to buy for tenants at that time, and you know from previous reports I've brought to you that right to buy exists in new builds affordable housing provided by housing associations. Our assessment at the moment is that yes, it could be subject to right to buy, but we do need to make further inquiries on that because there aren't many councils that have transferred its housing stock in total and then come back and started again later on. So we do need to qualify that in more detail. I think to come as well.
Yeah, and just to say that if those homes were ultimately subject to right to buy or right to acquire, as it's known in the housing association world, that money, if it were to pass that people acquired their homes, could then be reinvested by the council, part of that money reinvested in further new affordable housing. So there would be some ability to recycle that money into more affordable homes further down the line.
Sorry, Chair, if I may, just to add to that, we know from national research that 87% of tenants in social housing have no form of substantial savings. So in order to get a deposit for a property, that's quite difficult. And also the discount value is at the beginning of a tenancy is very low. In fact, you can't buy the property for I think it's 5 years anyway. So it will take a long time for a person to develop a sufficient deposit and also sufficient deposit reduction in price to exercise the right to buy anyway. So there's a certain inbuilt resistance to right to buy anyway.
And if I may, just one final one. I did read in another report, I think that's on the table this evening, about housing construction using timber frames that speeds up the process and adds. Was this something envisaged for this construction development? I can't remember now.
Well, we've seen some really good examples of timber frame across the district, and one of the later papers has an item on that. It's a method of construction. There are only 6 new build units proposed in this. They may we'll have to go out to tender obviously through our development agent to secure a contractor that will build that. So I wouldn't want to predetermine the construction method just yet.
Anyway, well done, and forward with all speed.
Kerry, I think you want to add something.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Ratcliffe. I just wanted to come in on your point about purchasing right to buys. I know they can't be protected. They are part of the right to buy scheme, which is enshrined in statute.
It's reassuring
but I just want
though that the full amount of any purchase would be reinvested.
Absolutely.
We do need to maintain this stock once they are developed and built.
And I just wanted to say that it is that build cost is actually taken into account when a discount is calculated, so they do get the full cost of the property, back when they are buying new builds.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm happy to second it, and I'm pleased to be able to defer to Councillor Ratcliffe and let him move it, because, as you know, we looked at this on the commercial board, and we're very excited by this. And I know it's been some years in incubation, Rob, and I thank Aaron for all your input to our authority. It's been, a job well done. But thank you very much. But I'm pleased to see that it's come on our watch at this time, because, as you know, we've got one of the planks in the corporate plan is to build more houses. That's why I referred earlier that this authority does punch above its weight with housing. So happy to second it, Chair.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very, very pleased about this return of council housing. In my father's day, there were a massive amount of council who built in Wordsworth, a massive amount, and there's still good properties now, the proper brick-built council houses, and there's still good properties. I'm very pleased about this. Just one little slide, that really we won't be running them ourselves, will we? We're handing over to a company, is that correct, Rob? Sorry.
Yeah, I think you're referring to who will be managing the homes once
they're
built. Is that right?
The old council houses were managed by the council.
Yeah. So the assessment that we've taken in conjunction with Rob and his team is about the amount of resource and experience the council's currently got in-house of managing homes is obviously limited because the stock that you did own was transferred quite some time ago. So for a programme of this size, it was felt that certainly as a starting point, it would be best to get someone in with that experience to manage those homes once they've been completed, to be sure that we've managed appropriately and to the council's required standards.
Yeah, thank you. What I was really excited about being councillors again, because from a lot of tenants of housing associations become that big, and remote, that people have lost trust in housing associations. So if council houses come back like they used to, people could go into the council office and complain and get repairs done. Today, they wait in weeks and weeks to get repairs done on the homes now. So I welcome council houses to come back. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Pawley.
Yes, I welcome this as well. It's just two questions actually. I completely understand why you want to bring a management team in to do this, because obviously in-house it would be more than difficult. But it's just that just going about normal day business, I get lots of complaints from people who are in social housing that's run by housing associations about they don't get replies, they find it difficult to get through if they've got something wrong, various other things like that. And I'm wondering if the complaints would go to the management team rather than straight directly to us as owners of the houses. And if they are going straight to the management team, are we going to do anything about seeing what the history is of the people we give the management to see if they have got a good record of responding to the sort of issues that Councillor Slack has just raised? That's my first question. And the second one is, if anything awful should happen in a house that we've built structurally that did cause death or injury to somebody, I'm not hoping that never happens, but it's just a question that came into my mind. Would we be liable, or the management team be liable?
Just in terms of the first question about how the homes are managed, complaints where they're referred to, and the track record of any managing agent that would be appointed. In terms of initial complaints, certainly they would go to the managing agent in the first instance. If they were dealt with, there's a mechanism within the management agreement specification for serious cases of complaint, etc., to be referred to the council, and the council would have regular meetings with the managing agent to understand what's going on within the properties that it owns. So that's how that would get dealt with. And in terms of ensuring the track record, you'll see in the paper that we're going to be going through a procurement process that will require suppliers, when they bid for this opportunity to be the managing development agent, to evidence their experience. It will test their history in terms of dealing with complaints, their ability to meet regulatory standards, etc. So that will all be tested through this process and evaluated by the council officers and ourselves, Altair, supporting the council amongst others. So that will all be tested and ensured that there's a process in place. Added to that, the management agreement obviously will have required performance standards, and in the hopefully unlikely event that the management didn't meet the performance standards, then there would be ability to review their continuing appointment as a managing agent. So hopefully that gives you comfort on that point. In terms of the liability, I think this would very much depend on the nature of what occurred to mean an issue arose that would require some sort of recourse to a party. But generally speaking, with new homes, there's warranties and insurances in place, and depending on the nature of it, what's occurred, it could end up either being the developer of the new homes themselves that are on the recourse or have to take responsibility for any issues. It could be the managing agent. It's possibly and probably less likely to be the council, because you've outsourced that that function to the managing agent, and that's reflected in the contracts that have been drawn up and the specifications that have been drawn up. You know, that's their responsibility ultimately.
That's good, thank you.
Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to add my thanks and congratulations to Rob and his team for this, and indeed to Aaron for his participation in this excellent report. But two questions occurred to me. First of all, given that managing agents will want to manage these houses in a fairly I suppose effective way and perhaps straightforward way, is the intention to build houses, say, on 6 or 7 different sites, only a few at a time, 5 or 6 houses in one place, or concentrating them all on 1 or 2 sites? Whichever answer I get for that question, where are you going to find these sites? Because obviously, certainly the social housing of this kind needs to be close to existing communities, I think, not stuck out in the middle of, or on the edge of a village somewhere, perhaps. But if it's going to be around our towns, and obviously, as we've heard in previous reports tonight, the sites are few and far between, and they've more or less been exhausted through the local plan process anyway. So where are you going to find the sites in a very short term, if this scheme is going to go ahead in the foreseeable future?
Okay, so in terms of how we've developed the business plan, there's obviously, and this goes for many housing associations or councils looking at development programmes. In the short term, there's a number of schemes that have already been identified by Rob and their team. We are talking about smaller schemes, so they do stretch across a number of different sites, and they come forward in a number of different ways. So some will be likely to be on council-owned land that's been identified. Some will be Section 106 opportunities from developers, some of which have already been identified and discussions have been taking place. And there's a third strand to that, which will be empty homes and bringing those empty homes back into use for affordable housing, although admittedly they're yet to be identified. So the early year or two of the programme, there will be identified sites. Then after that, you make an assumption based on what you already know is happening in the future years, that you will be able to identify those sites. So it'll either be through things like a further review of council assets downstream might identify more sites that could be put into the affordable housing programme. There'll be planning applications coming forward where applicants will have Section 106 affordable homes requirements that Rob and the team can then get involved with through that process. And with empty homes, it'll be a case of scouring the market, if you like, and identifying those empty homes and making approaches to property owners on that basis. So there's a myriad of ways that these sites will come forward. They have, at this stage, been identified across a number of sites because they tend to be smaller sites that the council is likely to get involved in, as evidenced with what Rob's been discussing with landowners, etc., applicants so far. So that's how the build-up of the programme happens. So there is a risk in the later years that it all falls away, but the reality is the evidence to date suggests that there's the ability to get up to 52 homes within that programme, within that timescale.
Thanks, Aaron. It's been moved and seconded. I've got no other speakers. All in favour? Unanimous. Unanimous, thank you. So we'll get back to the agenda. First of all, I'll say thank you to Aaron for attending and answering the questions, and all the best. You've got plenty of time to catch your train. Item 9, Ashbourne Airfield Link Road. Paul, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, this is a good news story in many respects. This is the culmination of 5 years' work of the District Council. This is something which Steve Capes and Giles Dan, our economic development team, have led on throughout that period, and it's a shame that Giles or Steve are not able to be with us this evening. But I would like to pay credit to them for the tremendous work that they've done over this significant period of time to bring forward what is the most strategic land allocation in the Derbyshire Dales, which will deliver many new homes for our residents, but also significant employment opportunities. The report is in 2 parts, really. The first part is to inform members of the outcome of our D2N2 submission for £1 million local growth fund, which we secured back in January, and the business case for that is attached to members, attached to the report for members' information. The second part of the report, and that's really recommendations 2 to 6, deals with the disposal or dedication of part of the highway, Blenheim Road, which serves the industrial estate. This is necessary in order to bring about the development. We are in advanced discussions with the County Council's Highway Authority, but we do need authority from members to progress the transfer or dedication of that piece of land in order that this can bring about the main development itself. So I don't wish to add anything further to the report, Chair, but happy to take questions.
Councillor Purdy.
Councillor Ball wants to speak, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, can I just need to say, I'd like to just ask a question upon this, and then after that I'll come back and I'll move it. And firstly, I'll just say I echo what Paul has said as regards Steve Capes and everybody really within the council, us as members as well, because we have to sit and make these decisions just as much, and it is something that is beneficial to our district and our area, and I think it is a very good news story. But the one question I would just like to make sure and ask is, we're giving all this delegated authority to the head of resources to do this, but can I just ask, because it's such a long while since it was initially put forward, that the drainage system, because you'll be working within the Severn Trent, is really looked into again, because there's a lot of development happened prior to this happening, and where it'll end up going, I just have that problem. But as regards what this is, I will definitely propose this, and I'm in full agreement to it all. But the question being is that question being made at point.
Yes, through you, Chair, the issue of drainage is something which we are and have been for some time working through with the County Council, and that's one of the issues that we do need to bottom in terms of the approach that will be taken, hence the reason why we're asking for a fairly wide-ranging delegation in order that we can get the best solution, not just for Ashbourne and Ashbourne Airfield, but also for the District Council.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Ball, or later?
No, upon that, obviously it was just clarification that it will be just looked at again. It's not a case that, this was all put forward in the past, and as Paul has said, we've been working over 5 years to get this and the likes, which I understand, but like I've said, we have had a lot of different things have happened within Ashbourne, and obviously everybody knows the Ashbourne Airfield is on the top of a hill. So where's the water got to go? Down, and it's going to go past new houses and the like. So I just want that to be looked into again. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm happy to second it. I like what Paul said and what Councillor Paul says in our grateful thanks for more than 5 years of hard work. So hello Giles and Steve, hope you're watching. Thank you very much for your hard work. I think also we need to thank D2N2 for their £1 million contribution. And we also need to recognise the work and the monies and the backing that the County Council have put in. We earlier spoke about this one with collaboration, but this has been real collaboration that's brought us together. A comment was made earlier by Councillor Barefoot about, I've got confidence this will be seen through. Yes, we have.
Councillor Morley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I will be supporting this because for the last 5 years I was fortunate enough to be the member for Regeneration, working very closely with Stephen Giles on this one. Dizzy heights indeed. And I would like to pay tribute to them. I'm sure they will be watching at some point. And just to point out that the negotiations just on the roundabout itself, before we got onto the other stuff, made Brexit look like a walk in the park. And so congratulations to all concerned.
Are you seconded, Councillor Morley? I didn't be seconded. Sorry, okay. I don't think we have any other speakers. It has been moved and seconded. All in favour? Thank you. Item 10. Derbyshire Dales District Council Local Planning Authority Monitoring Report 2018-19. Mike, please.
try. This one will be brief, I promise you. The authority is required to prepare an authority monitoring report to set out progress against the contents of the local development scheme, the statements of community involvement, and the local plan. It's an annual report, and we present it to members at this time of year for publication. All of the relevant sort of responses or the results of the monitoring exercise are set out in the report. I don't think I need to say much. It's a fairly self-explanatory report, and I'll be happy to answer any particular questions.
Councillor Burford.
Thank you, Chair. It's on affordable housing on page 94, paragraph 220. I think I've totaled it up correctly. £116,898.04. Section 106 monies is going to come from Matlock, Ashbourne and Daley for suitable public open space and park schemes. Presumably they'll be in or close to those towns, including, in advance of Councillor Pauly saying something, I'll say including probably Matlock Bath Illuminations Gardens as well. So will ward members be consulted or asked for suggestions, and if so, when? I don't know what proposals might come forward, but we in Matlock will certainly have some suggestions if we're invited to do so. A second question, employment ban delivery. How do officers assess and determine what type of employment use is provided at each location when planning application opportunities arise? There was offices or manufacturing or workshops, and do they consider the need for inappropriately sited businesses to be moved to some of these perhaps more suitable sites? And the third and final question, retail development in town centres, vacancy rates. You notice from the report that Ashbourne's 12%, works with 13%, and Matlock only 5%, with the national average 10.3%. So I'll ask, why is that the case, and how is it being addressed by officers? And if it's only by resisting change of use to offices or residential for shops in the towns, is that suitable? Is that acceptable? And has that policy been shown to work elsewhere?
Mike.
Okay. In terms of the issue about open space, each application will be subject to an individual negotiation, and I'm not party to the contents of what those negotiations are, but I'm assuming that there will be something that will be discussed between the developer and presumably Becky's team, or Becky's team in terms of the open space side of things, to establish exactly where the funding will be secured to. In terms of the employment land requirements, this starts off with the local plan. The local plan sets out what the requirement is. It sets out what the type and nature of the requirements are across the district, and we seek on a site-by-site basis to determine what is the most appropriate mix of uses for those particular developments, to make sure that we are getting the right type of employment land in the right places. So that happens on a sort of an ongoing basis. In terms of the vacancy rates within the town centres, generally, whilst they're above the national average, they are only marginally above the national averages. The work that we've done previously on retail and town centres suggests that generally and by and large they are on the healthy side. I appreciate there is concerns about what is happening in Ashbourne. We will use our planning policies to look at applications where they might result in the loss of retail proposals and A1 uses to non-A1 uses, which will then weaken and dilute the amount of retail provision within a town centre. And I understand that there are other avenues of exploration being undertaken, particularly in Ashbourne, to try and secure regeneration for the town centre, and the council can do what it can through those mechanisms to support the town centres going forward.
Councillor Froggatt.
Thank
Chair, I'm going to keep it brief. I'm happy to move this. It's a very good, straightforward report. So I'll move it.
Councillor Sly.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I shall be brief. Can you, on item 2.16, it speaks about, again, about affordable housing, 11 or over, on different sites. Can you can't give it me tonight, but can you give me in the next few weeks the list of from 2018 to 2019 year, the list of sites with 10 or 11 over, but that did not meet the affordable housing rate? Can you give me those, please, over the next, not tonight, and also whether there should have been financial contributions and didn't get the full financial contributions? Can you give me that as well, please, over the same period? Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wayne.
Just a very quick one, and I'll be brief. 220 on page 95, it says that there's £84,000, £199 in the section 106 contributions. And I recently had a trip to Ashbourne, and I walked through the park, and I was really surprised by the quality, or the lack of quality, for the bandstand. It looked really poor. And is there any chance that we could get some of that funding to regenerate that? It looks awful. And I'm not from Ashbourne, but I just feel that it could be something that we could do it. And if we're not going to do that, what are we going to spend this £84,000 on? Have we got any specific projects that we're intending to look at?
Mike.
I'm not sure that, and I think I'd have to defer to Becky. It might be that she gives you a written response to that.
I'm happy with that.
In terms of both of those particular aspects,
I think Paul would like to come in on this one.
Yes, Chairman, I can answer that question. The bandstand is going to feature in a report on the capital programme, which members will be considering in the next few weeks.
Okay.
No more speakers. It's been moved but not yet seconded. Somebody wants to second. Thank you. All in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Item 11. Daley Neighbourhood Plan. Get back to you again, Mike.
This is the last one. Chair, this is a good news story, really, and a good news report. For the past nearly 6 years now, 5.5 years, Daley Town Council have been working on the preparation of a neighbourhood plan. It went through the final stage of referendum on the 21st of January. Whilst the turnout wasn't particularly high, it did get a favourable vote, and therefore we're in a position as an authority to make the resolution to make the neighbourhood plan and then to enshrine it as part of the development plan for Daley Dale.
Councillor Sathan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. 5 or 6 years, Mark, it's been a long time. The finishing line is now in sight, so I'm happy to move offer recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to second this. As you are, I'm a neighbourhood plan proponent. I think whilst the end result it doesn't quite meet the expectations that I had back in 2011-12 when Worksworth began. Nevertheless, it's a really excellent community exercise that focuses residents on exactly what it is that they're happy about, what they're not happy about, what they'd like to see enhanced, preserved, and all the rest of it. It really does have excellent outcomes in that respect. And I know Daley Dale, they've probably been at it for maybe possibly 5 years, but certainly 4 years that I know of. So well done to them, and I think everybody needs congratulations now for bringing it to a final conclusion.
Yes, thank you. And I'd just add my bit, because in Bramble we had this neighbourhood plan, and it does take several years to do it. And there's a lot of flagging on the way, you know, it's a big effort to make it, but it certainly pays off. I mean, in respect of the planning input, you know, that the village can make to a planning application, it does have good results. Thank you. Councillor Morley.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's a thank you to Councillor Ratcliffe, because we've been involved with a number of little neighbourhood plans down in Doveridge and down in the south. Every time that it comes to one of the parish councils, he's become the go-to guy for advice and support, and he's never let us down yet. So thank you very much indeed, Councillor Ratcliffe.
We have no other speakers. It has been moved and seconded. All in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to item 12, proposed amendment to the off-street parking places order. Keith, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's hopefully a very quick and simple report, and it basically involves a bit of good housekeeping as far as the parking order is concerned. It's, as you can see, the Fifth Amendment to that order, and the Fifth Amendment, it's great, isn't it? Let's bring America into it. It's basically around the introduction of electric vehicle charge points and a vehicle by which we can regulate the use of the bays once they're installed. That's the main one. There's also the inclusion there of a new build car park at Ashbourne, and then a couple of little tweaks on boundaries and borders. But it's the first stage in an exercise where we next go out to consultation. So, nothing more to add, really.
Councillor Hobson.
I'm happy to propose a motion.
Councillor Slag. Second.
Yeah, Enmore car park, is it to go solely for EVs, or is it going to be part of it?
There are 8 bays proposed on there,
8 bays proposed,
and I think there's 14 bays altogether.
Yeah.
When they're first installed, 2 bays will be dedicated solely for the use of electric vehicles. The remaining 6 will be what we call mixed use or dual use.
Dual use, yeah.
And as the number of electric vehicles picks up, then more and more will be moved into dedicated use.
So that car park will eventually be in the next few years a dedicated EV car park. Yeah, and also on the pricing, there'll be the normal car parking fee plus the money for charging. Is that correct?
The way we would regulate it is that it's a parking space. If it's on a paid display car park, the vehicle owner would still pay. If it's on a free car park, there's no charge.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other than the cost of charging the vehicle, of course.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Oh, sorry.
Chair, I was just going to second it. But I did ask you a question before, Keith. You might want to let other members know about what the procedure is for payment on these public electric charging points. But just a further question I was asked at Worksworth Town Council the other night is, what happens when the car park is closed because there's a public event that's been licensed?
That's an easy one to answer. The car park's closed, so there won't be access to the charge point on that particular time. So yes, if you've got a carnival on there, it's not accessible.
Okay.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Chair. It's a great idea, and I hope it goes well. However, I've just got a concern. A scenario where somebody parks the car in there, and is there any technology within the charging units that you're looking at to show when the vehicle is charged, other than from within the vehicle? Because I'm just a bit mindful that people might hog the spaces and keep in the spaces and deprive other people from the opportunity of doing that. And is it something that can be issue fixed penalties for later on? That's all I was wondering. I was just thinking if they were there overnight, that was all. If vehicles were left there overnight and other people didn't get opportunity, that's all I was thinking. If you see the technology, somebody sees it's full, then they could enforce against that vehicle.
The daytime occupancy is pretty straightforward, very easy to regulate, very easy to enforce. The overnight issue, I think we'd be less worried about, because the aim is that a lot of our car parks are empty overnight anyway. A lot of the funding, or all of the funding for this particular phase, has come from the County Council scheme for residential charging points. We're simply playing host on there. So we want to encourage them to park on there overnight and not get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and move it because it's charged up. So we'd be tolerant of that.
Okay. Councillor Pauly.
Yes, I'm just coming back to the payment scheme. Can you explain to me how it works? Because obviously if you've just got a diesel car and you go and park it, all you're paying for is parking your tyres on the tarmac. But if you're charging a car, who's paying for the electricity? That's the first thing. I mean, are we charging? You've just said to Councillor Slack we're going to charge the same car parking fee. Who's paying for the electricity? And then, because I don't know how these things work because they're so new, and are they going to be cash and card or just card only?
Okay. First of all, who's paying for it? The motorist will be paying for the electricity that's been drawn from the charging unit, and the rate for that, the tariff, is set by Chargemaster. They manage the pillar, the charging pillar. We will get, as we already do, revenue from the parking spaces for parking. The order, the way it's laid out, or the proposal in the order, simply means that those bays can only be used by electric vehicles during the day for the purpose of charging, if they're set aside as dedicated bays.
Can I just come in?
Yeah, sure.
So you didn't answer me about cash or card, and I'm wondering about if it's just going to be card, because they might be paying for the car parking space and the electricity at the same time, and I don't know how that...
No, two separate payments, and my apologies for missing that. I simply forgot. I'm not writing the questions down. I believe the feeder pillar, the charging pillars, are either chip and pin or credit card contactless, or that you can pre-register and have a registration card. So if you sign up with Chargemaster, you'll get an account card, and you'll be billed at the end of a month. So, but I'm afraid it is all cashless.
Yes, thanks. I was just asking that because of the situation we've got with signals. I wondered. Yeah, thank you.
No more speakers. Oh, sorry, Councillor Burford, the big part.
Yes, I think the more you think about EV charging points and the implications, the more you think about the potential problems. But I suppose it depends on the location of these points. I mean, the one in Matlock that's proposed is Edgefield Road, which is a linear car park, just nose in, as we know, next to the town hall here. So I wonder what's the average full charge time for an average car, and what are the implications in terms of queuing? I mean, if someone desperately needs to charge a car, and you wonder about that nationally, and how you then, I think you see if you're 90% exhausted your battery and you need to charge it urgently, you're going to find the nearest charging point in the nearest town that you're passing through, perhaps. So signposting will be required for that as well, but how would you regulate the sort of problems of queuing? And you know, think about Edgefield Road, they're probably going to the Edgefield Road car park or the physiotherapy centre car park, whatever, or just drive up and down Edgefield Road waiting for the first charging client to move their vehicle, so you can get yours in place. But I just it seems to be such a potential problem. I don't know how it would work out in practice. If everyone's going to have charging or EV charged cars, then electric cars, then obviously that's going to be even worse, more of a problem. But it beggars belief as to how that's going to work in the long term. But in the short term, just these small points that occur to me.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know enough about electric vehicles to know the difference in the charge times, but with the question of queuing, I don't think there'll be an issue in the early stages. And one of the proposals that Chargemaster are doing, by introducing 8 parking spaces, only 2 will be reserved solely for the use of electric vehicles. The others are mixed use. They monitor that online, and as demand increases, they'll approach us and suggest that they bring another couple of bays into dedicated use as demand increases. And as for motorists finding out where there's available space, that's what the apps do. And I'm mindful that I didn't think this would throw any questions whatsoever, but I'm mindful I can get an information sheet out as soon as I get the information from Charge Master.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's no more speakers. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Item 13, Matlock Bath Illuminations Review. Ashley, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will keep this brief. The report outlines the achievements of last year's event, but what I would like to do is to thank Dave Turby and his team, and especially the boat builders, who we have one present this evening, and are very much at the heart of this event for their endeavours this year and in previous years. Obviously this year presented quite a challenge in terms of the ongoing weather, the flooding and the challenging conditions that we had with the river. It's actually the first time in 17 years we've had to cancel an event due to the risk that the river offered. The main points that I'd like to pick out of the report are that that the fees and charges are put forward, that have been put forward by the working group, are approved by members, and also the final recommendation, number 7, is that £15,000 is reinvested in the event. This year there was a net income of just short of £30,000, despite the impact that the weather had on attendance, as the event is still performing very well. We'd like to reinvest that money. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Fawley.
Yes, Chair, I'd like to propose that all the recommendations are accepted by the committee. I'd like to thank the officers for preparing this report, which outlines everything that's happened, and it has been a difficult year. But not only that, for all the officers and staff that are involved in putting it on, because it hasn't been a happy time for them to have to go out in this kind of weather and keep it going. And they really, and Jeff Stevens and his wife, because it's been difficult, and they've all done a really grand job. So I'd like to thank them for that, and the boat builders for the work they've done, and for them as well, it's been challenging. I'd also like to thank, while we're at it, thank the boat builders for the work they did to help with the BBC Rickshaw Challenge that followed on. So having done all that for the illuminations, they put aside some of their own time to put their little boats up on the grass so that would be seen on BBC, and that was something that enhanced the image of Matlock Bath, and is good for the district. So basically that's all that, and I really welcome the 14,500 so that's going to be reinvested into lighting, because not only did this company that did the lighting this year do an absolutely amazing job, we're helping the climate at the same time, so it's brilliant. It really is a real good story.
Councillor Wakeman.
Yes, I'd like to second this, please. Magnificent event, one from miles around. Thank you.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. I was the other ward member. I'd like to echo what Councillor Mrs. Bawley says. It's a wonderful event, and you know, we go back over the years. When I first came into council, it was threatened to be got rid of, and thankfully we moved on from that. Ash lifted it in 2014, was it? And we wanted to make a wow factor. We've not quite got the wow factor yet, but we are increasing, and the way that Dave Turby and his team have put the effort into this needs to be, as you say, thanked. Not only thanked, but commended, because you know they give up there every weekend, and it's been a grim year. Dave will give testament to that, and as you say, Dave, you're not getting any younger, bless you. But keep going. We've got to keep the boat builders going, because without you guys, it wouldn't be the event it is, and that needs to be put on record. So YouTube will shoot up now with lots more views, I'm sure. Yeah, Councillor Waller referred to the fact that we've saved, is it how many tonnes of carbon output, which is another message that needs to be put out there.
90%.
Yeah, excellent, from the new electrical team that's proved to be of value. So, yeah, look forward to next year.
Councillor Slyke.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to echo the other speakers. I think it's a tremendous event. They come from miles around, people, and the children really enjoy it. It's a great event, and hopefully next year we'll have better weather. We can't guarantee it, but hopefully. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Morley.
Yeah, it's just a footnote really, Chair, because there is a Blackpool connection, and we were talking to Blackpool Illuminations about buying some of their old sets. In the event, what happened is Blackpool wound up saying, could they not have our boats?
Councillor Gamble.
It's just a question on the cost. It says staff pay 18,000. Does that cover officer time spent on it here?
No, it doesn't, Councillor Gamble. The expenditure there on staff pay is wages, not salaries, so it's wages working the event. In terms of officer time here, it's part of the salaries that are covered with their day-to-day duties. So it's part of the job description.
Do you know roughly how many hours it takes? I'm just thinking like 42,000, that would seem, well, it's a fairly small profit margin and that's easily eaten up by staff time.
No, we look at the event on its own really. Dave's time is not solely dedicated, he's not full-time on the illuminations. His role covers different aspects such as markets, the ABC at Bakewell and other events. So his time is proportioned and those salary costs are split across within the service. This solely relates to the operational side of the event.
Right, so would it still make a profit if we counted that into it?
Yes.
Okay. It must be very cheap.
No more speakers. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Oh, sorry, Councillor Pauly.
I really must put this right, so I haven't said that the contributions from traders and the sponsorship has gone up this year, so we ought to say a thank you for that as well, and I apologise for missing that out.
Yeah, well said. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour, please. Unanimous, thank you. Before we move on to item 14, we've gone past the 8:30 barrier. Can somebody move that we continue or not?
I'll move it, Chair. I'll come.
Okay. And a second? All in favour? Okay, so we take 5 minutes. We've got 4 more items. We'll take 5 minutes break. Back here at 8:40, please.
Always want all.
Sorry, Chair.
So we're back onto the agenda again. It's item 14, affordable housing development programme. Rob, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this report seeks member approval to add 3 schemes to the Council's capital programme to go forward to the next council meeting, so these 3 schemes can be funded. In summary, it's a good news item in terms of the number of affordable homes that this paper presents. We've added into the appendix some details about the larger scheme, obviously, because that in itself is quite interesting in terms of not just the number of bungalows, which will be, I think, the biggest bungalow scheme we've built ever in Derbyshire Dales, and also perhaps in wider afield in the rest of the county. And the standard to which those bungalows are going to be built, which is M42, that within the building regulations provides a very high level of access and amenity within the property. There'll be some of the largest bungalows that housing associations have built in the Derbyshire Dales, so that's where our investment is really helping to make quality delivery come through. There is a great effort, as well as you can see in the appendices, to use local resources for materials and labour, and that's something that the contractors are very keen to do. The other thing I would like to highlight is the work with the Harrison Arms House Trust, an Arms House Trust we've not worked with before, but provide an important source of affordable housing in Matlock, and they need some help to bring an empty property back into use. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Councillor Purdy.
Well, again, another good news story, Chairman, on our affordable homes. I mean, when this application first came to us on Maple Road, there was great concern because of the infill between you and Daley Dale. But it is an exception site, Rob, isn't it? Or is it?
Actually, no, it's not an exception site, actually.
Right.
So the fact it's all affordable is
it's been built to the affordability standard, and the exception is the way that the properties are built for disabilities. That would, yeah, okay. So another good news story. Absolutely, Chair.
Councillor Hobson.
Chair, I'm happy to second it. As Councillor Purdy said, it's a great news story. Houses across our area, nothing more to say. Very happy for it.
Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I applaud this report, and I hope the scheme is going to be successful. It's very close to the flooding, of course. In fact, you could have taken a good picture on Sunday when I drove past of the water lapping up to the edge of the area that's being cleared by the contractor, where the turf was being removed. But anyway, what I'm intrigued about is I'm wondering why such a detailed and impressive development spec has been prepared for this what was a very contentious scheme, compared to, for instance, the golf club site on Chesterfield Road in Matlock, where I think the design, external works and landscaping leave quite a lot to be desired. I mean, the spec here is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I've never seen anything quite so impressive in my time as a councillor as this particular one. Everything was being considered, from climate change issues, biodiversity, timber frame energy performance and so on, creation of privacy and seclusion for individual plots. It's very impressive. But I just wonder if this is just a one-off, or whether this is going to set the agenda and the standard for future affordable housing developments in the district.
Do you want to answer that, Rob?
Well, I'd say continuous improvement is my goal, obviously. But no, the company that we're working with, Shevin Homes, is new to the area, and they bring, I think, a wealth of expertise and innovation to the Derbyshire Dales. I would just point out the excavations on site have to do with archaeology testing, not actually anything to do with the first build.
Councillor Sly.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very pleased that this has come about. It's been 2 or 3 years in the offering, coming along. It's been quite a while, but we're here at last, and I'm pleased to see this coming off, and I hope it's a pattern for the future. This may be, I don't know if there'll be a problem as global warming comes in, as the rivers keep coming up. I hope not, but we can always put good defences in, I suppose. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wayne.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I fully support the development, and especially because it's affordable homes, and particularly because it's bungalows with wheelchair access. However, I've got realise the planning has been authorised and everything. I've got some concern in relation. You put that measures will be incorporated to drain the permeable site, etc. But are we as an organisation, and we're supporting the development of the affordable homes, including some for people with mobility problems in the area that's got a possible propensity to flood. You mentioned in your risk assessment that obviously there's an issue legally with using the funding before a certain timescale, so there'll be no clawback. But you've not mentioned anything in there regarding the potential liability and our credibility should there be flooding on site, or worse, with people with mobility problems, because it's going to be somewhat unnerving when the river does flood, and it will flood, and it may be 2 metres above. We're putting vulnerable people with disabilities in there, and they're going to see the water coming towards it. How are we going to risk manage that, and are we safe as an organisation? That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
No, that's a very valid point, and obviously we rehearsed lots of those discussions in the planning committee. What I would say is NCHA, Nottingham Community Housing Association, are making a substantial investment in this development, probably 70% of the total cost. So you can see from the figures how much that is, and they as an organisation will be well assured that the development and its construction will be at the best it can be, and protect them as well from risk, because as a landlord, the last thing they want is to have flooding in their property. So our job is very much enabling and supporting and helping these schemes happen, and we've got a good track record of that. I know there's some nervousness about the closest to the flooded area, but the suds, etc., the drainage of the site and how that's going to be managed, the offload from the water that would otherwise result on the site. That is built into the design, and the Housing Association, with government's funding as well from Homes England, are satisfied that the scheme is viable, and that should give us comfort.
Councillor Pauly. Come back very quickly.
Go on then.
Thank you. And in relation to assurance and the health and well-being of people on there, is that up to the landlord, maybe platform housing or whoever, to do that? Or can we offer any assistance as an organisation?
Well, typically when we enable housing developments with housing associations, in this case Nottingham Community Housing Association, they are the landlord, everything lies with them. What we don't do as a council is take on additional risk where we don't need to, so that all the developments we've built, and we're building about 70 homes a year, we can't retain ongoing liabilities potentially with those schemes. So the reason for housing associations to exist is to manage that risk and manage those properties and protect their tenants.
Councillor Pauly.
Yes, I just have a question about the table at 2.1. To renovate 2 empty houses has cost twice the amount, one house has cost twice the amount of one house. It's a new house. I just wonder why unless it's a listed building or some building of special historic interest that's not listed, why we are renovating empty houses when we could be building 2 houses for the price of one, the investment or the contribution of.
Yes, no, that's a good question. Typically, bringing empty homes back into use is expensive because often they're older properties and there are more defects. What we're looking at here is the grant rates that we're applying to the scheme. So the total build cost of those properties on Bakewell Road will probably, I think actually it's about 180,000 a unit. So the actual grant percentage is quite low in those cases, whereas the houses are already there. We haven't had to buy those. The housing association has bought them or owns them already. So the cost of renovation is different, obviously, in terms of the grant rate per unit.
But it still means that we're giving £25,000 towards one house, whereas we're giving £10,000 towards one house on Bakewell, on the Daley. So it just seems to me that we're getting one instead of 2.
Yes, sorry.
I just wondered why we do that.
I appreciate your question. So, in any housing programme, we have different priorities that we try to meet at different points. So, in bringing empty homes back into use, we get benefits that accrue in terms of, we haven't got to hopefully build so many homes on greenfield sites. If we bring empty homes back into use, we get to use a redundant property that otherwise would further degrade. So, in those situations, you need to put more grant in because the renovation costs in those properties are high. You could split that money out and spend 10,000 per unit on the scheme, but the economics of every scheme is slightly different, and typically renovation of existing stock is more expensive. But if we put all of our eggs in just new build, we wouldn't fulfil our objectives on the wider housing strategy. Really.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back to Councillor Wayne, if I may, on planning committee, we gave it real scrutiny because we were nervous, as Rob said. We looked at the physical point where the floods came to, we were shown that. And we have on record Jonathan Jenkins, the agent, standing here on YouTube saying it won't flood. Now, we can't guarantee that, of course, but yeah, your questions are prudent and correct to ask. So I do hope that there will be a plan in the event of, because we can never stop the biblical happening, can we?
No more questions. It's been moved as... Councillor Gamble.
Right, quick question. And it's great that there's a lot of environmental input into these houses. Is that going to be included in the energy source as well? Like, what boilers are these going to have?
That's a good question. Typically, these will have gas boilers for the moment. I mean, by 2025, all new homes will be off gas. That's the specification we're working to at the moment. We don't. If we wanted to put in a more advanced system, that would cost a lot more. Make the viability of this scheme harder to deliver.
Is there any possibility that we could put a scheme now that would be easier to retrofit? I mean, from what I understand, if you put air pumps in later on, quite a lot of old radiators aren't suitable and you end up ripping the whole system out. Could we put things like heating system in that could be later retrofitted to air source or heat source?
From my experience, that's very hard to achieve. The property in Ashbourne, we're hoping to, with the Housing Association, put in air source heat pumps. We have to take out all of the existing plumbing and the existing boiler and refit a new system, so that in itself retrofitting is very expensive. Typically you wouldn't retrofit a new property until maybe 25, 30 years of the life of the boiler. So it's not, well, if you wanted to look at this purely through a green lens, you would hope to put in ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps. But the industry isn't at that standard yet.
Is there any way we could put something in that would be easier to retrofit later? Like, could we put a system in that is amenable to retrofitting?
I don't think one exists, to be honest, Councillor Gamble, and the scheme is so far advanced. The developer would have already started to secure the materials and deliverables for this site because they have to start in March.
Another question as well also on it, on the Daley ones, which obviously, let's face it, are going to flood. Are you going to put a planning price to evacuate? If you're going to put people in wheelchairs and somewhere it's going to flood, are you going to have an evacuation plan in place as to how you're actually going to get them out?
Sure, it's not going to flood. It's done by the agency, it won't flood. Environmental agencies say it won't flood.
Rob, do you want to start?
Yeah, this was discussed in the planning committee, and the scheme has already gone further than they need to in terms of raising the site above the floodplain. And although it's not geographically far away from it, it is much higher than the standards that minimum standards have to get to. So I don't want to answer any further questions on that particularly.
Okay, we've no more speakers. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Unanimous, thank you. Item 15, Hurst Farm Social Club loan. Back to you again, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a new, if you like, form of work for the council in terms of giving a loan to a social enterprise, a community interest company. You know from my work on Hurst Farm that we've been supporting the regeneration project for some time. It's very much in working with the local community on the estate and with the stakeholders there, including the school and the Friends of Hurst Farm community group. And we're starting to see the fulfilment of several of our projects that we've brought to members in the past. This project seeks to regenerate the social club building, which is getting on a bit now and is in need of some major repairs. We've been fortunate to work with a really good and committed group of residents who run the social club. They've been empowered through our support previously to appoint an architect, and a quantity surveyor, a bid writer and a bid developer and a business planner, and they're supported by Marie-Christine Smith, our estate regeneration manager. We've been able to put together a funding plan which is attached in the appendices, and you can see that there's a substantial project underway. The planning committee recently gave consent for the works on the 4th of February. The project itself, the club isn't capital rich by any stretch of the imagination, and a lot of the funding grants that are in place require them to spend money first, and you know, with VAT it makes it quite difficult for them to bankroll a project of this size, and so our loan is an enabling loan to help them do that. I guess with any loan there's a risk that people don't pay, and we've working with Lee from Legal, we've put in conditions to do with agreeing a loan agreement, and of course we have to be in a position, and this is the stated position, that the funding agencies listed in the appendices all have to have agreed their funding prior to us making our loan available. So our exposure to risk, we're trying to manage that as best we can. So there is also a provision to sort of overbid within the project, assuming all the grants came in, the project would be running not as a profit, but would have a good cash flow position. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. It's a very good project. Thank you.
Councillor Ratcliffe. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Councillor Slacker.
Yes, thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Slacker, I beg your pardon.
Thank you.
We've got different lists.
You go.
I'll try to be very yes, I'm pleased that it's having a revamp. It's looking tired, and but my question is, this is phase 1, of course. The phase 2 is got to be financed later. Is that right, Ron?
Yes, I mean we've helped them with minor repairs, and you can see that they've had a grant award from the County Council as well to help with that.
Oh, from the
yeah.
county as well.
There were some health and safety issues they need to address quite quickly, which they've been working on.
Yeah.
The bigger project, subject to now we've got planning consent, subject to funding, would see a much larger renovation of the project, and the planning commission includes a scope to do slightly more works if the funding allows.
Yeah, thank you. It's very good, really, because it's a big estate and it warrants a good source of flow. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Froggatt.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move this. I was looking to be on the site visit for the planning committee, and it's a very tired building, and the plans that we pass are going to make such a huge difference, especially to the regeneration of Hurst Farm. It's going to be an asset, not just for the regeneration, but for the residents, with the little farm shop, etc., etc. And it really is going to be well worth doing. Thank you.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to echo the comments that the Vice Chair has just made there. I've been present at any number of committees where Hurst Farm has been on the agenda, whether it's been the project manager or the renewal of the project manager's contract, or whether it's the cladding project of some of the more dilapidated houses there, or whether it's this. And I noticed in paragraph 1.1 it talks about this particular aspect being the central part of the regeneration plans. But this whole thing is not just about physical regeneration, it's about the social investment that this brings about, restoring pride, confidence, a new dynamic, if you like, to engage people, so they've got some sort of shared investment and can be proud of the area that they live in again, and this all adds to that, and I think it's absolutely laudable, and we certainly shouldn't deny them the loan because it's got extremely beneficial outcomes.
Are you seconding that, Councillor Rapp?
Oh, well, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Burford.
Thank you, Jane. Yes, I'd like to echo what Mike has just said, and we also congratulate Rob and his team, and particularly Mary-Christine Schmidt, I think, who's done a tremendous job on restoring confidence, shall we say, in Hurst Farm with this regeneration project, which is excellent. And I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously a lot of money is going to be spent, and I fully support the recommendation on refurbishing the building, but I just wonder about the surrounds, because I think when you go up to the Hurst Farm Club, the last few years, it has deteriorated in terms of the wider sort of ambience of the place, in terms of, there's quite a bit of fly tipping around the car park, and there's a route through from there to Bull Lane to Asker Lane, which is quite well used and probably needs a bit of enhancement and improvement, really. I wonder if there's going to be any improvements carried out to the surrounds at the same time as the building is going to be refurbished.
Thank you. Yes, Chair. I mean, there are, whilst the building is going to be improved, as you say, the other thing that's happening alongside this is the Heritage Lottery Fund grant as well, and we're working with HLF to complete all of our initial works, and we should. I think we're pushing an open door. I think it's fair to say, so that with this Marie's skill and support from other officers in the council, we will have a successful bid for phase 2 next year, which will see quite an investment in that. And we are working to bring additional investment to the estate. So, for example, the car park. We know that the car park the social club needs more work, and that's on my mind when I'm talking to potential funders as well. So I think it's worth picking up on other points that have been made already, and just to allude to that lots of other officers from the council are working on Hurst Farm as well, supporting the residents and the housing team, and Becky and her team particularly should be noted as well, because they've done a really great job in supporting the social side of the project as well. So it's in sports development, working with the children on the estate, working with the school. So it's really positive approach.
Councillor Morley.
Yeah, again, thank you, Chair. It's just a little bit of comfort. On the bottom, I think the key to it is on the bottom of page 157, underneath the cash flow forecast, and that Triodos have offered a loan of up to £150,000. I've done quite a lot of business with them over the years, a merchant bank who specialise in regeneration projects. If they're willing to invest in it, it's a pretty solid case.
No more speakers. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Unanimous, thank you. Item 17. Events taking place on District Council land for the 75th anniversary of VE and VJ Day. Ashley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, another brief report, and the reason that we're bringing this report in front of members is in order to support the E-Day, which takes place on the 8th of May, and VJ Day on the 15th of August. We are asking to apply principles that are outside of the event strategy that members approved in June last year. By that I mean that we waive the £50 licence fee or legal fee that we would charge for such events, and the council does not look to recover any loss of revenue or costs associated to providing these events. The simple purpose is to support communities in celebrating these two events. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Probert.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to move this. I remember the last VJ Day celebrations. And it was wonderful, so I'm quite happy to move this. I think we should be applauded for even considering it. Thank you.
Councillor Wakeman.
Yes, I'd like to second it, please.
No other speakers? Oh, sorry, supporting.
Question.
Right. I couldn't see you for a wrong, sorry.
Thoughts just occurred to me, is there anything that we're doing as an authority to mark this day? Or should we be thinking something that we could just raise a flag?
may have to come back to you on this. As far as I'm aware, we honour the flag, but our role is more to encourage communities through these particular measures and try and promote them. We don't have our own event as such.
Okay. Councillor Pauline, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I just had a question. I support this fully. I mean, it's absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But with some events, you look at them and you think this is all going to be fantastic, and I always have to look at what might occur. And we're saying none of the costs will happen to anybody. But supposing we get a rowdy crowd who do quite a lot of damage, what are you going to do about that? I mean, people might drink and then they might damage plants or infrastructure in our gardens. How are we covering that?
As with any event that we licence that is held on district council land, it's not free for all as such. There are certain requirements that we have in terms of risk assessments, necessary licences and insurances are in place. But if there is damage, as there would be with any event, we would look to the event organisers and possible police intervention, where we're talking about waiving fees or not looking to recover costs that is associated to setting up or putting on of an event. I think if there's damage, that would be treated slightly differently.
Councillor Swindle, is it?
No. Sorry, Chair, I was asking to turn the mic off.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. If no other speakers, Councillor. Okay. Okay.
Can I just ask, of all the places that want to hold one of these events, have they all been agreed?
Most of them, yes. There's quite a bit of work to do in terms of making sure risk assessments are adequate and evacuation procedures are in place and the necessary licences or insurances are in place. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one that stands out as being a concern, but we do need to tick all the boxes to make sure that the events can go ahead.
But subject to that, will they all be approved in the meeting?
I can't say that without evaluating the rest of them, and I think that would be unfair if we commit to that without having a full review and the team reviewing each of the licences and insurances that are required.
No more speakers. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Anybody against? Abstentions? Thank you. Two is it?
Two.
Okay, final item, Ashbourne, item 18, Ashbourne Bowls Pavilion. Becky, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. So this is Ashbourne Bowls Pavilion. It's come to the end of its life. It's in very poor condition. So we've been working with the Bowls Club around moving it forward and ready for the next season. So we're proposing to enter into a 25-year lease with the Bowls Club, which they are happy to do so, and on the existing pavilion site that's there at the minute. And then on top of that as well, we're looking to invest £10,000 out of the existing capital programme budget, and that would be to £7,000 to demolish the existing pavilion, and then look to invest £3,000 into either some temporary accommodation for this coming season for Ashbourne Bowls Club. Any further questions? Happy to take any, Chair.
Councillor Ball.
Not a question, but a thanks to all the staff that have and the officers have worked with this. Mike and sorry, name's gone completely now. Becky, there we go. Sorry, I was thinking of somebody else then. Yeah. So yeah, the concentration. Yeah, but I would just like to give a quick insight onto everybody that's here, because this pavilion, please note, it is not the pavilion in Ashbourne on the recreation ground that has been coming and going and coming and going. We've had all the issues as lights on this. The
the bowls pavilion is across the car park to that. They've run independently for a while, but it is all under district council's running still. And when they were doing the new pavilion on the recreation ground, they were supposed to be encumbered into this. And they only have like a built wooden shack, if you will, for want of a better word, that is their room where they go in and host a bit of tea and coffee while they're doing the bowls, matches and such. And they came and they asked, because of the ground itself and the bowling green, and we've had vandalism, and they came to myself and Councillor Lees and said, would there be any way forward with this? Upon talking to Becky and Ash and co, the group got together at the Bowls Club and said, you know, we think if we get help, we might be able to take this on. And so we sat round the table only a couple of weeks ago, really, to be fair, and it's all moved quite quickly. Obviously, this funding is necessity to it, but the funding is there to provide, not knock down the old, put a new one, but from then on in, you will have no responsibilities for it because they actually are going to take over the lease, so the running of it and that it'll be theirs. So with that, I would just like to say I will fully recommend this, and I hope everybody else does.
Can I just be sure, are you moving it?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you very much. No other speakers. It's been moved and seconded. I beg your pardon. Coming up at the
Chair, I'll obviously back this report, but I wonder, given that this funding is for demolition costs, and presumably providing the club and to assist the club in providing temporary accommodation for the coming season, is there a time limit for the maintenance of that building on site before a permanent building comes forward as a scheme, as a proposal? Or, I mean, it could be there perhaps for 5-10 years, could it? I don't know what sort of building's proposed, but obviously people don't want to see a temporary building indefinitely.
Thank you. No, so the plan is at the minute we will demolish it as soon as possible when you planning permission for to do that, but because of health and safety, we feel that it needs to come down as soon as possible. The club themselves have looked into some more permanent accommodation for themselves, and they have actually put a deposit down as well on that, so it will be something quite soon will happen. It's just in the interim between now and the start of the season whether something just temporary is accommodated on there, or whether this new cabin that they've purchased will go on there. Yeah.
Councillor Pauly.
Yes, I will support this, but it just brings to mind something I've been thinking about anyway lately. It says in 1.2 that these buildings are owned, managed and maintained by the district council. Well, they're not, are they? Because it's falling down. So I'm wondering if we ought not rethink, and instead of, I think we generally, if we're going to restore a building or make sure it's kept up, we do it from the reserves. We ought not to have an actual dedicated amount of money somewhere, so that on a yearly basis we've got money set aside to keep all these little buildings that don't seem terribly important to most people but are important to locals up to date. And I would suggest that's something that we actually ought to take forward and think about, rather than getting to the point where we've got to get another association to take it over and it gets demolished.
Councillor Purdy.
Well, I know where he's coming from, Councillor Pauly, and I can't tell you, but agree with you. If I take you back a number of years, it took me about 5 years to persuade the authority to refurbish Jubilee Bridge. And the fact is that, I don't want to knock any chief executive, but there was a chief executive who there was a policy here where there wasn't any maintenance budget, put it that way. And then we go into austerity, so we've not been able to keep up to date with the maintenance of our buildings for those two reasons. And so we've now got the legacy of that, and I'd like to think we're turning that around, and this is a starting point. The corporate plan, I think, is another starting point, and yes, we should be looking after our assets.
Becky, would you like to respond? I'm going to bring Paul in as well, I think.
Yeah, so regarding the pavilion building at the minute for the bowling pavilion, so there's £70,000 that has been set aside for we may be putting towards the Ashbourne Pavilion, sports pavilion. And because of the discussions we've had with the new partnership in Ashbourne regarding the Memorial Pavilion, we haven't been doing any works on the maintenance of the buildings because it was due to be demolished, and there's a bigger scale project looking to come ahead in the future. So that's why we haven't been doing any actual maintenance on those buildings, just enough maintenance to keep it watertight and actually health and safety wise, people are able to go into that building, access it and use it. So that's kind of the reason why we haven't done any further maintenance on those buildings in Ashbourne on the recreation ground.
Paul, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Whilst we haven't got unlimited resources, as part of the review of the capital programme, the corporate leadership team is looking at that very issue to set aside a sum of monies which is not specific to a particular project, which would allow us to actually improve some of the poor quality buildings that we do have.
No more speakers. It's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much, and that concludes the meeting. Thank you for your attendance.